Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the West Goshen Township Board of Supervisors meeting for Tuesday, February the 1st, 2022. To start the meeting, will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please note that because Chester County is currently an area of high transmission for COVID, we are requiring all attendees to wear a mask while seated or moving around. When making a comment or asking a question, you may remove your mask to speak if you wish. Also, please be aware this meeting is being streamed on the Township YouTube channel, and that the meeting may also be audio or video recorded by people present in the room. So our first item of business this evening is agenda item number 3, the Chester County Hospital request for a waiver of land development. So this is a request from the Chester County Hospital for a waiver of land development in order to construct a modular structure to expand their existing emergency facilities. This is being pursued in order to address the influx of patients as a result of the closures of Jennersville and Brandywine Hospital, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic. Typically, this type of submission would go through the land development process and would involve multiple submissions and reviews at various levels. However, given the urgency of the situation, Chester County Hospital is requesting a waiver from that process that is outlined in the Township subdivision and land development ordinance. So Chris, Rick, I'm going to hand it over to you and with our guests here.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we met with representatives from Chester County Hospital back on January 24th. They originally submitted a plan and architectural rendering for a modular building that didn't have a full level of detail, and the initial assumption was that it would need to go through the land development process given the nature of the submission. Upon review, the plan is proposed to go on primarily existing impervious coverage. It would involve the relocation of 3 existing ambulance parking spaces, and would consist of approximately just under 3,000 square feet of a modular building connected to an existing facility. I believe it's an existing decontamination area. That's correct, correct? Based on the review and the additional information that was submitted, it's the recommendation of myself, Mr. Craig, and Ms. Camp that is subject to conditions that this could be, the land development process could be waived given the nature of the situation. Did I miss anything, Rick?
No, I believe so.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we have some representatives here. Would you like to introduce yourself, say your name, and tell us what you're going to do?
Absolutely. So, good evening, members of the board. My name is Dan Rowley. I'm the attorney with the firm of Saul Ewing. I'm representing Chester County Hospital here tonight. I think that was summarized well of what we're proposing here. It's really an extraordinary set of circumstances that is putting a heavy strain on the hospital with the closing of Brandywine Hospital, Jennersville Hospital, and then the Omicron variant, which we're all dealing with. And to relieve some of that strain, we're proposing to install a modular building to give a little more capacity to the emergency department at the hospital. We do have members of both the hospital here tonight and as well as our design team. We did prepare, a short presentation, but if I'll defer to the board. If the board would rather just open it up to questions, we can also handle it that way.
So, board, you want to see a presentation, or are you ready with questions?
If they have a presentation, it's not that long, is it?
It's a short presentation. I can bring up Michael Duncan, who is the president of Chester County Hospital, just to explain the need a little bit more. We also have members of the design team here who can walk you through exactly what we're proposing.
Well, let me go ahead and let him put on there.
Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael Duncan, who is the president of Chester County Hospital.
Too tall for that. Good evening. I'm Mike. I'll tell you just a little bit more about what's going on in the county, and you're reading some things if you see the press about a variety of organizations trying, one organization is trying to sue Tower to make them sell them the property. The medical society is trying to join in with that group. At this point, as of today, Brandywine Hospital does not have a license to operate. So today they turned over their license. So if somebody were to show up and want to run that hospital, they'd have to go through the whole process of getting a license. We think it's unlikely. We would love for somebody to run it. It would be good for those communities. It would be good for all of us if the behavioral health hospital was running. Losing the only inpatient mental health hospital in the county is a real blow. But I think it's unlikely. And even if someone was able to bring it back online, you got to hire nurses and get a medical staff and all that stuff. It'd have to be a year or more of a process. So we If you go back to our structure, we originally designed the construction that we had at 99 beds in 2020 at exactly the right time when the pandemic hit. We had a room to put folks. We are just in the finally finishing the very last piece of the emergency room construction. So we'll bring 10 more beds online in 3 weeks, and then that 4 or 5 year project will all be done. When we get those 10 beds back online, it was designed to handle something like 53 to 56,000 emergency room visits a year. That's about what we're seeing right now. And so we're trying to plan for multiple eventualities. The patients from Brandywine, about 40% of them will probably come to us. The patients from Jennersville, about 40% of them will come to us. It's a little hard to predict the pandemic, but it looks like Omicron's going away fast, and hopefully the infectious disease docs are right, and that'll be the last big wave. So we intend to take the next 6 weeks or so to assess what's happening with Omicron, what actual volume are we getting from Brandywine and Jennersville, and if it's what we had projected, we're going to need more rooms than those 10 extra rooms. So this approach gets us another 12 rooms, I think is the latest number, and that would put us in a position within months to be able to handle a lot more visits. We have some space inside the hospital that we could do construction to permanently add more beds, but that's a multiple 2-year process, not a 3 or 4 month process. So we want to be in a position to take care of our community. We want when people come to the emergency room to not have too long to wait, to get great care, great service. To do that, we need some more capacity. So that's why we brought this before you tonight, and we appreciate your consideration. I would be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Go ahead, David.
I guess one of the questions I had was relative to the NPDS permit, if that will be affected at all as a result of the...
Okay, I'm not the right guy for that. I'm the macro guy. You need an expert.
I think they said that it's less than an acre of disturbance, there would be no...
It's not going to require...
Yeah, they're not going to require any...
Okay.
It's not going to impact that.
That's not going to affect
No.
at all. Okay, I guess another question I just wanted to have a discussion on is, with Rick and any input. I guess processes are in place for a reason, as we all know, and they're very important to have them. I think if we start skipping processes or eliminating them, my concern is we might run into issues down the road. Not to say I'm not opposed to it or anything, but I just want to have a discussion on it. That I would suggest rather than eliminate, we expedite the land development process. And if that's the case, how long are we talking about? Are we talking days, months? Is that
3 months.
Pardon me?
3 months minimum.
Even with expediting it?
That's expedited.
Okay.
Senior time review, all that is minimum 3 months.
Okay. I thought if we can expedite it, it could be.
Yeah, and Tammy, let me just give you a comment. I totally agree with you that, waiving land development is typically not something we would suggest. And there's been other times when applicants have come and I've said to Rick, what benefit do we get from doing the land development? And let's sort of think about, are we missing out on those benefits if the board waives it? So in this case, we talked about stormwater management. There's the minor increase in impervious cover, Rick has confirmed, is already dealt with in the spaces that they've constructed. They're going to still meet the parking requirements. Sewer, obviously, to the extent they need more sewer capacity, that's when they'll have to analyze and determine and deal with the sewer authority if they do. As far as the layout of the lot, there's nothing, it's already primarily impervious cover. And one of my suggested conditions, which I did run by Dan and they accepted, was that I would want there to be a plan that gets recorded that shows this modular building having been built, and they're willing to do that. But that won't be your typical plan that gets recorded independently because it hasn't gone through that process. It has to go to county planning and all that, but it will be attached to some sort of declaration that explains that the waiver was granted, and therefore there is a public chain of title to show that this building was approved and got built.
Okay. Well, that clarifies a lot of my questions.
Right, and I would just add quickly to that is that this really is an extraordinary set of circumstances, and that you have 2 hospitals closing in a quick period of time. You have, a pandemic variant that's, wreaking or causing capacity issues. And this won't also be the last time the township sees this again. We'll be required to get a building permit. The township staff will review that. Sewer, we are confirming whether we need it or not, but if it's required, we're going to have to get it. So it's not, the last time the township's going to be reviewing these things. And also, as Kristen mentioned, there will be a recorded declaration with a copy of the plans as well.
That makes me feel better.
Absolutely.
But I guess one thing, as noted on this letter, there were certain stipulations that the board was going to grant the waiver, that there was like 6 stipulations that we were going to add. I would just add another one, that waiving land development review does not put anything in liability on the Resolution Township.
Yeah, I mean, it would, and that is within your discretion to be able to waive that.
Right, so, that was my only question. Thank you.
Other board questions? Go ahead. Yeah.
So first of all, I want to say that I really do support supporting you guys during this. It is an extraordinary, circumstance that we're going through. And I was just over at the emergency room last week with Chaz and Kim, taking a tour of the Good Fellowship Ambulance Company. And we went over and we saw how many of the beds were occupied by the mental health patients. And this is a huge growing problem. So I'm just sort of scratching the surface of how much I know, but I appreciate you guys coming in and talking about it. And I definitely want to work with you on that moving forward. And I also just feel super lucky that your hospital is in our township. I can't even tell you, especially now, because everything you guys do. So I support this, and I just want to thank you for coming here and for thinking of all of Chester County.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, can you give us a timeline on when construction will begin and how you see this unfolding?
We're still evaluating that at this point. We want to be able to be nimble on our feet in order to address capacity issues. So, we would have to apply for the building permit, finalize the plans, things of that nature. I don't know if there's an exact timeline on when it would be constructed or installed, really.
So you don't have any idea when this is going to get started at this point?
Not at this point, no.
All right, the second question is, do you see this as just being a temporary addition at this point?
So I think that's better answered by our design team. I have Brandon Sargent with BBLM Architects, and maybe I can have him come up and talk about what exactly is being proposed. And I think he may be able to address your questions better. Brandon, you want to talk?
Hello, Brandon Sargent with BBLM Architects. We are the architect of record and coordinating the design team for the project. And the design team, just for everyone's reference, is not only engineers local here, but the modular building is being provided by a company called Serenus. They are a company that provides temporary structures, disaster relief structures for healthcare facilities, both nationally and internationally. So they have their own design team that focuses on the modular building itself, and we work with them to pull everything together into one project, one set of documents. So the hospital will review the need for this modular building as time goes on. Once it is built, it does have a finite lifespan according to the company, which is somewhere between 8 and 10 years. But the construction is insulated metal panels, trusses, roof panels. It's robust construction, fully designed and engineered to meet building code. So it's not a trailer, as some people might have referenced it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I've got a question for you. Sure. So is it brought in sections and assembled on site? Is it brought in with panels? Is a lot of erection on site? How much actual on-site construction is it assembled at?
There's actually quite a bit of on-site construction. It's all brought in as raw materials. So you have, I think there are like 64 leg pieces, and then there are trusses and the floor panels. All of that's brought in contractor trailers, gets dropped off, and then the local construction team assembles it under supervision from Certus, the manufacturer.
Okay. Other questions from the board? I just have a clarification question going back to some of the earlier numbers that you presented. So you say that with the expansion that you've done over the last few years, you're now at about 53 to 56,000 visits to the ER per year capability. Just for clarification, was that, when you said that's expected to meet the need, did you mean that that would be able to handle the expected 40%? Or no, so that would be in addition to that. So if you have more than 40% and it's 60-70% coming to Chester County Hospital, is this new structure going to be sufficient, or are you going to be saying we need even more?
I'd rather not put any more, of these kinds of facilities out. So if we need more beds than that, we're looking at space internal to the hospital. And we just spent a lot of money to build a beautiful hospital. I'm not crazy about having a temporary structure. So as soon as we think we can build internal space and not have a temporary building, that would be our desire. It's a little unpredictable at the moment, trying to figure out what's going to come from northwest Chester County and southern Chester County.
So if we just play that out a little bit, if you get this in place, I know you're focused on getting this designed in place, and then, we're 6-9 months further along, it's been in operation for 3-6 months. Will you have enough data at that point to say, yep, we know what our demand is now, we know where we are with COVID, we need to start a new project to create more bed space within the current footprint of the hospital? Would that be a likely scenario?
I think it is a likely scenario. I think we'll have a very good idea in the next 3 to 6 months what ultimate volume we need.
Very good. Other questions from the board on either the design or the circumstances, duration?
I'd like to make a motion, we waiver the salary requirements.
And I'd like to second that motion.
Do you want any conditions attached, John? Do you want any of the conditions attached that we had suggested in an email?
Yes.
Yes, but the conditions that are outlined, are the 6 conditions outlined as per the memo there from Chris Pacer.
Actually, 7, borrowing the one that I had.
I heard that Kristen said that we have that legal right, we don't have to add it, we already have that right.
Okay.
So this with the, so the motion, John, just to be clear, is to approve a waiver of the land development for the Chester County Hospital's temporary structure, including these 6 conditions, correct?
Yes.
And the 6 conditions are stated in Chris's memo to the board of February 1, and they're identical to the ones that I emailed to Dan in an email on January 27th, so you're not surprised.
I believe these were put in the agenda materials for public review as well, so they are. I just want to ask a question, Kristen. So this is all we need to do in terms of approving this. We don't have any other, we waive this process tonight, it's green light.
And then the rest is for administrative and Rick to handle, sewer, all that kind of stuff, building permit, building code department, right.
Okay.
But no further board action.
Very good. Is there any other board questions on the motion? Are there any public questions or comments on the motion? Doug?
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Doug White, I'm a West Goshen resident. I'd like to see to ask for waivers for this. That's a big request because Planning Commission always likes to be involved with these things. There's traffic flow and lighting and just the discussions for that. I'd like to see a little more justification. Is there an actual real emergency? In other words, if this is denied for any reason, what hardship would the hospital have? I mean, would the hospital have a hardship if you have to go through land development?
I think, let me just take a shot at that. The hardship I'm worried about is residents waiting 9 or 10 hours to be seen.
Okay.
And that, I'm worried about the health care risk to the residents of the community.
Is that happening now?
We've
Is Paoli or Christiana taking up any of the slack?
Paoli's getting some of it, and they're suffering similar problems, and they're looking at putting an external, tent on a trailer like we're looking at.
Okay. My opinion is to try to do some sort of land development, but that, of course, that's up to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Doug's question did make you think of just a follow-up question, really, which is that, the traffic flow and the safety of movement between the new structure and the hospital main building. I presume the design engineers have reviewed the best location. This is the best location that would minimize that risk of an incident on traffic or otherwise. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, are there any other questions from the board? Any other public questions or comments? Okay, then we're ready to take the vote. All those in favor of the motion say yes.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you for your time here.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, moving along on the agenda, next up is item number 4, discussion of a proposed responsible contractors ordinance for West Goshen Township. So before the board tonight is a draft of a proposed responsible contractors ordinance for West Goshen Township. This ordinance would establish criteria for contractors to be successfully awarded contracts for municipal projects above a certain dollar threshold set by the board, for when the requirements in the ordinance would have to be met. Materials were included in the agenda, posted for public view, and have been provided to the board for discussion. And those documents include a draft of what a possible ordinance would look like for West Goshen Township, a list of municipalities in the greater Philadelphia region that have adopted these type of ordinances, a resolution adopted by the Chester County Board of Commissioners establishing requirements for public works contractors, a decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals, Third Circuit, relative to challenges to the content of these types of ordinance, information regarding the ordinance in West Norriton and East Norriton Townships, and also information regarding the pre-qualification requirements that PennDOT has that the township currently utilizes as a requirement for its paving program. So all those information has been provided to the board and was in the agenda material. So, board, open up discussion. John, I know you've been heavily involved. Would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure, why not? Let me just start off by saying I just went through a campaign to get elected to this position and was elected in November. And one of the pieces of information I put out throughout the entire township included things of what I stand for. I mean, I think people have a right to know when they're voting for somebody what that person stands for. So, one of the things that's on that piece of information that I put out to over 6,000 households within the township, which is every household that had a voting person in the year 2020. And that included this, responsible contractor. Since the township must take the lowest bid on major projects, John believes that there should be minimum standards for all contractors. So, I was elected to that position. I know not everybody voted for me, I understand that. But a lot of people did. In fact, more people did than did not. So I am pursuing that campaign pledge, and that's part of what I'm leads us to tonight. And I started reaching out to, there's, I don't know, a couple dozen, maybe 3 dozen municipalities in the Philadelphia area that have what's called a responsible contractor ordinance. And what that does, it sets the lowest standards for a contractor to be able to submit a bid to the township for capital improvement. So according to Township Code, okay, this is the law. Once a capital project is put out to bid, the bids and the bid proposals are received, the township is required to take the lowest priced bid. Boom. No question about it. That's it. What is allowed, however, And what several municipalities have done is to set minimum standards or requirements that a contractor must meet in order to submit a bid for a project. So what this does is to help eliminate the unscrupulous, the ill-trained, the unsafe, and those lacking the resources to get the job done on time and within budget. So as a board, I believe it's our duty to protect the interests of taxpayers and the residents of the township. And it's the right financially responsible thing to do. So I just want to read a little bit. I'm not going to read this whole ordinance that's being proposed here tonight because it's somewhat lengthy. But I want to just read some of the whereases, which are the reasons for this proposed ordinance. Whereas the Board of Supervisors of West Goshen Township desires to adopt certain provisions to ensure that contractors and subcontractors that perform work valued at over a certain amount, which we have to discuss and decide, when any public facility or public works project must meet certain minimum requirements to ensure that they have the capacity, the expertise, the personnel, and other qualifications and resources necessary to successfully perform public contracts in a timely, reliable, and cost-effective manner. And whereas the board finds that such provisions shall serve the best interest of the citizens of West Goshen Township by requiring that all bidders for public projects shall possess the highest qualifications necessary to perform public contracts. And whereas the township is required, pursuant to the second-class township code, to award public contracts to the lowest quote-unquote responsible bidder. And the township deems responsible bidders to possess all of the qualifications, expertise, personnel, and resources as set forth under these regulations. And there's a number of specific regulations that they must comply with, and there's like 15 of them. And again, I won't read all of them, but they cover having to have the necessary licenses on hand, necessary bonding. They could not have been debarred, defunded, or revoked any licensing or cited for any safety violations having to do with any contracting jobs or connected with any contracting criminality of any sort. Also, they have to have some safety training. The employees should be minimally OSHA 10 safety trained. And also they should have an engagement with an apprenticeship training program that's approved by and recognized by the United States Department of Labor or the State Apprenticeship Agency. Also, they should have the technical resources and equipment available and on hand in order to be able to properly complete the job that they are bidding for. And they have to submit a contractor certification form along with the bid once they submit the bid proposals. So, many municipalities and school districts have done this in the area, including Chester County last December, a year ago. Just keep in mind now, the lowest price is not always the best cost. Just because you get a low bid doesn't mean that's going to be the best value for your dollar. And I think it's our duty as fiduciaries of the taxpayer dollars that we ensure that we get the best bang for our dollar for the township. Because oftentimes, and I'm full disclosure here, I'm 38 years as an electrician, so I've been involved in contracting throughout basically my entire working life, and also was the apprenticeship training director for my program during the 1990s. So I'm somewhat familiar with how the contracting game is played out. Oftentimes that I've seen instances where sometimes an individual will come in with a low bid to get the lowest price in, get the job, and then charge exorbitant extras so that the price of the job at the end of it may actually exceed other bids. So again, the lowest price is not always the best cost. And again, this is not a union or a non-union thing. The Associated Builders and Contractors, which is made up of merit shops or non-union affiliated companies, have many apprenticeship training programs available to their membership. And you can Google it. And so I did. And this came up when I did that. It's apprenticeship and craft training, and it's offered by the ABC, or Associated Builders and Contractors of Eastern Pennsylvania. They have an apprenticeship program, which are registered with the U.S. Office of Apprenticeship and the Pennsylvania Department of Labor. And the ABC is currently provide hands-on instruction in a number of trade areas, including carpentry, construction, craft labor, electrical, heavy equipment operator, HVAC, masonry, and the list goes on, painting, pipe fitting, and so on and so forth, and plumbing. So the apprenticeship training programs are out there, and they're both union and they are also non-union. So it's not a union or a union kind of a deal. It's whomever feels they need to get the proper training is available for that contractor. All the other responsible contractor ordinances or resolutions that I have seen, and like I said, there's a couple dozen within the Philadelphia area, have this apprenticeship training requirement as part of the ordinance, and for good reason. And it has to do with apprenticeship training helps train the next generation of skilled workers and makes it more likely that the current tradespeople, the journeymen, the mechanics on the job, have the right skill sets to do the job and to do it safely. And quite frankly, we're facing a shortage right now of skilled craft workers. As a government body, I think we can encourage and support the training of these skilled workers that we need as a community to build, maintain, and repair our infrastructure. And more importantly, proper training means the township taxpayers are getting the best return when our tax dollars are being spent on large dollar projects. The dollar amount when this responsible contractor requirements would kick in is such that the small mom and pop outfit would still be eligible to do work for the township, but the large projects with the large dollar associated with it, with the greatest exposure to the township, would be covered by this responsible contractor ordinance. So those are the reasons why I feel that it's important for us to move forward for this. And I would ask the board's indulgence to do a couple of things. Number one, to have a discussion about whether they feel this is of value, and if so, to set a dollar limit when this contractor ordinance would kick in, and then ask our solicitor to come up with a final draft for our consideration for advertisement at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you, John. So, board, what thoughts, other comments from other board members?
Chair, can I comment?
Sure.
I just want to say thank you, John, for putting this together. You did a good job, and I know a lot of work went into this ordinance, so I really appreciate the time you put into it. And I know overall you're looking at the best interest of the public and saving money, which is all very important aspects. I guess one of the first questions I have is, do you know the percentage of non-union versus union has apprenticeship programs?
Well, it's my understanding there's actually more non-union apprenticeship programs out there, but the question is whether or not they're viable or not. So I guess the question is a two-part one. If I could be a politician here, the answer is, yeah, there's more non-union apprenticeship programs, but there's probably more qualified union apprenticeship programs. So how's that for an answer?
Okay. I just, from a legal perspective, I didn't want to disqualify the non-unions and look like it was discriminating against.
Well, so that's all outlined in the case.
But that case isn't presidential.
Right, but that was outlined and it actually, they dismissed that. I don't think they found any
President, relative to that. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we're covering those bases.
Yeah.
And then, so that was one of my main questions, was that, to make sure. And then also, I went ahead and yesterday walked the building and met with township employees and also the sewer plant. Since the employees have to work with this document every day and it impacts them greatly, including the consequences, I wanted their feedback on this. Basically, I want to make sure that the employees want and need to make their jobs easier and more efficient. So, walking to the Public Works and also the sewer plant, talked to a few folks there to see what their feelings are and will this work for them, and that was one of the main concerns. The feedback basically I got is that we'll weed out really good, long-standing contractors in West Goshen. A lot of father and son businesses who show up for emergencies that we've had in the sewer plant and various other things. And they don't overcharge us, basically, and they're there, always there immediately. That's going to weed out companies like that don't have the criteria that fit.
When you say weed out, you mean exclude?
Exclude. They, it's obviously loyalty there. They're doing excellent work, which I can attest to being on the sewer authority board for that. We're already strapped, basically, right now in sending out available bids to contractors because of COVID and the availability of contractors we have out there right now. And I don't want the ordinance to limit the pool or maybe no contractor availability at all. Little companies are always available in an emergency situation. I just want to make sure it doesn't end up costing West Goshen more money because we have to go to the next contractor in line for the bid because the lowest one was not available. But I understand we need criteria and we need to make sure that they're qualified too. So it's a fine line, important. I think Chris summarized the last three projects where the next lowest bidder cost would have all been higher. The three live projects we have right now is Ravens Lane, which would have been 36% higher. Boot Road restripping project would have been 17% higher, and the Pine Valley Stormwater project is 22% higher.
Do we know the total cost of those projects?
Yeah.
I don't remember them all off the top of my head. I know that the only one that I was here for was Pine Valley, and that one was around $720,000. I believe the Boot Road project was about $335.
Is that our share or is that the total cost?
That was total cost.
So our share was roughly
Roughly.
165.
We ran the bid process, right?
And then Ravens Lane, I don't remember off the top of my head what the cost of that project was.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Tina. I know you're in the middle of your questions. I just want to address this before I forget. So if we did have a limit, if we had that sort of set thing, if we're taking that Boot Road project, for example, that for our share, would that limit only pertain to our share? For example, we could still use those contractors that worked on that because we're only paying the 130 for 140.
Since the township would have, and Kristen, please correct me if I'm wrong, since the township administered the bid, I think it would have been subject to the overall price.
Yeah, I mean, you could put the ordinance, you can have the ordinance say whatever you want it to say. So, to be quite honest, but in that scenario, because the township was the one bidding the project, I think the draft ordinance, if you set the number at the 250 that was discussed, I think it would be, you would have to, it would apply.
Okay. And the other thing, you brought up emergencies, Tina. Number 8 in the ordinance says emergencies, and it says, should the West Goshen Board of Supervisors determine in accordance with the provisions of Section 3 of this article that emergency circumstances exist that render the requirements and procedures set forth in this section unduly burdensome, then in that event, the township may award a procurement contract without application in terms of this section. So if we have a busted pipe or whatever in the middle of the night and we have local, and if we deem the board that this needs emergency service, I think that that gives us the ability to.
Yeah, but then that local contractor can't bid on the job to make the final repair. He's good enough to come in for the emergency, but not make the final repair. And you're going to eliminate 2 West Goshen-owned construction companies that have done a lot of work. Sean, last meeting, you said you commented on how good you kind of did on Sunset Hollow.
So there needs to be a way to make certain exceptions for contractors who have done good work in our township because we don't want to put them out, and we certainly appreciate the work that they've done.
Person said you can't do that.
You have to be careful about doing it. That's where you're now avoiding the whole procurement process, and the thought process behind the procurement process is not to favor specific, everybody has to be on an even playing field.
Yeah.
So when you start to grant exceptions at the discretion of the board, it really runs them up with that law.
So
I
if
get
those
fearful.
contractors get an apprenticeship program in place, then they would qualify.
These are small mom and pop outfits. Their sons that learn from their dads, they're now teaching their sons.
Which is an apprenticeship, I guess, in its own way.
But
That's what I
All you
said.
have to do is register with the state.
they have training programs, but they're not necessarily apprenticeship programs.
How difficult is it, and I don't have a lot of background in this, how difficult is it to register for an apprenticeship program if you're a business? Do you
I
know?
couldn't tell you.
I don't know either.
Well, I will say that, also, I don't want to talk to Chris, but he did talk to Carroll Engineering, it was Chris Peterson. He indicated that the most significant issue contractors confront is compliance with the Class A apprenticeship program requirement. And they're a pretty big engineering firm that we use also in the township. And he provided an example of a project his office did for White Marsh Township Authority where 12 bids were received, but only 4 met the eligibility criteria. Depending on the size of the company or the type of work they perform, a contractor may not have this type of program in place. He also said basically that. So basically, just moving on, what it proposed overall consensus basically indicated the ordinance would not work for large projects as a result of that. That being said, I think this ordinance would work on smaller project scales, where the union can work on maybe electrical or plumbing, but not the big projects. So maybe cap it at $10,000 or something like that in the ordinance, if we adopt it at all. But I'd like to hear a little bit more from Dave, because you have to work with these contractors every day, and I don't think Mike's here tonight.
No,
But just kind of have your take on this, because it's really about what you can work with, not necessarily me.
well, I mean, I agree with John with the lowest responsible bidder. And the township has over the years, since we instituted the pre-qualified PennDOT with the paving bid, we've actually had to dismiss bidders before because they didn't qualify as pre-qualified through PennDOT. If you want to do anything, I would go to that one. It's a little more fair across the board. It has some rigorous standards. It's also easier to check. You know, we're gonna lengthen our bid times. We're gonna lengthen the review with Chris from Carroll Engineering, with Kristen looking at the background on contractors.
That was gonna be my next question.
if
Who
we-
does the review?
If Carroll Engineering does a review on the bids that they put out,
Yeah, I've done reviews, like the trash contract
Yeah.
in the past, we've had some issues come up, and they've asked for my opinion on certain things in terms of, does the bid submitted meet the specifications, and is this a reason to qualify? So I've gotten involved in some.
would that bid fall under this?
Yeah, it would. So your point about
No,
well,
the definition, yeah, the definition excludes trash hauling.
okay, but go back though, your point about PennDOT pre-qualification, that wouldn't only apply to road projects, right?
I think that is just civil work, yeah.
Right, so that's not going to apply if they choose to build a new public works facility somewhere, though? Okay.
So let's explore that a little bit. So, I mean, I support the general principles in this ordinance.
Right.
But I also want to support our local businesses as well, where the work is predominantly equipment, earth moving, sanitary stormwater repair. There's no plumbing, there's no electrical work to it. I'm talking, maybe a tiny bit, but in terms of a specific building type project, some of the projects we've done, the sewer plant, public works projects here that would be building related, where you need HVAC, plumbing, electrical, masonry work maybe, carpentry. Those are kind of projects where I want to support apprenticeship, skill building, etc. Where we have companies that are small, that train, and don't have an apprenticeship program, but can fix things in stormwater and sanitary sewer when we have problems, or even a $700,000 project. Because we've had good bidders on that, they've done great work. How do we create an ordinance that gets the best of both worlds, where if it involves a lot of trade and skill work, we want to have it go to the bidders who've got the programs and apprenticeship that can deliver quality workforce, a safe workforce. And it's in their wheelhouse versus this other thing where these other type of projects, road work, stormwater work, where someone can provide full-blown services is going to be a higher bidder and will pay more for it versus someone who's got the capability, proven track record, and doesn't have an apprenticeship program.
The Boot Road job, the Rocco one project came in on time, on budget, and the next highest contractor, I believe, falls under the Class A responsible bidder because they're doing a project in Warren Township on a community park. They were $55,000 more.
Yeah. So to my point, how do we craft something?
Can we do an either or, Kristen?
I'm not following how you want to do it. I mean, my thought was, you don't have to do it through an ordinance. You have the right in every bid project to establish the criteria of your bid specifications. So you can adopt by resolution what every, different types of projects that you're worried about, right? And establish now what those minimum bid specifications are going to be. And it can be a lot of these things. And so then when you go to your next project, and your public works department or your sewer department gets in charge, goes to Carroll Engineering, whatever engineering firm you're using to put the bid package together, they're taking those specs as the starting point for what that specific project, those minimum standards are. So it's done on you'll have across the board specifications, but they're fit into each project as the projects come up. So it's not just the lowest bid, it's the lowest responsible bidder, and responsible bidder, there's a million cases out there, but it's really making sure that that bidder, not just having the lowest price, but meeting all the other criteria in your bid specifications. And if your bid specifications say they have to have, a lot of the provisions of this ordinance, no criminal records and no projects where they've been in breach of contract, and those are typically in your bid specs now.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is being taken care of in a good bid package. It doesn't have to necessarily be in the ordinance. That's just another way to go about it. It's a suggestion, one way to go about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd like to support this, and I think it's a good thing. I think we need it. We need criteria. I'm just trying to think of the balance between both so that it does both worlds.
Well, just want to make sure there wasn't a misunderstanding, and you mentioned about doing some repair and maintenance work. That would more than likely not fall under this ordinance because it would be below the dollar threshold, which we haven't yet discussed. Most of the ordinances that I have seen that are out there, they have a $250,000 minimum threshold before this ordinance would kick in.
But let's go over the numbers. So, some of our most recent projects, stormwater projects, they're all unfortunately, they're all up there, right?
I know, but I was just addressing any emergency repair work or something
Yeah.
like that.
Well, emergency repair, like we were talking about, you got to fix it and get it back in service, but then you've got to come in and really fix it, and that's when you get into the big project.
Well, yeah,
So,
that's going to do a bidding situation.
So, to me, I'm not quite sure in my mind how we have a way forward that says, we don't want the board having to weigh in on every project with a resolution. Hey, we're doing an electrical upgrade.
Yeah, but you would do a resolution up front. You would do a resolution in lieu of an ordinance that would say, for these types of contracts, here's the standards that have to go into all of our bid packages. So it's not, I'm not saying wait for it till the bid package comes forward. I'm saying establish the resolution now. Establish the floor, the minimum standards
Okay, so
now.
help me understand what resolution would apply to stormwater, concrete work, earth moving work, only project, versus what resolution would apply to, we want a new electrical feed in here for more EVs, and we want a lot of electrical work done, and we want to have someone who's got an apprenticeship program.
So
I can't answer that right now. I think you're going to have to talk to people who are like in Dave's position that can tell you these are the critical factors that we want to see with responsible contractors coming in to do and name the various projects.
And we already have in the bid specs, bonding issues, insurance issues, experience. That's pretty much in there. We can review it. We can review it with Kristen, go over it, and anything we can do to tighten it up.
It's more than that, though, right? Because we've got here the idea that we've got projects that require significant trade skill work.
Right.
Plumbing, electrical, carpentry, masonry. I'm hearing there's some interest in the board here to say, how do we have a requirement that responsible contractors in those circumstances should have an apprenticeship program so that we've got the quality, the safety mindset, and the future of the skilled force available versus projects that still have all those other requirements. And then a project that, this company's small, it doesn't employ a lot of those trades, but it can do good work when it's a local business, and we can use those on projects that they're skilled at.
Well, something along those lines, if we're required to pull a building permit, maybe because that's going to be construction, electrical, plumbing, that's when that ordinance kicks in.
Okay, so that's a good idea. That's the best differentiator we've got right now, right?
When you're required to
Issue a building
Issue a building permit.
to do that for that project. That project that require basically responsible contract would have to have an apprenticeship program.
So you're not talking about a dollar threshold, you're talking
Well, we could have that too.
We could have that too. Different types of projects that occur, and maybe separate them out into different types of projects, and this wouldn't be a burden on anything, because you already have that criteria now, pretty much.
you could separate it out to include, to have a separate caveat for, say, work that involves in the public right of way, like the stormwater work, the paving projects, anything in a municipally owned right of way or easement, you could carve those out as well.
in an ordinance.
In a resolution.
Yeah, but what about an ordinance?
You can do it in an ordinance as well.
But you also need to be careful. A lot of our stormwater projects now are on private property because of the nature of the MS4 requirements. So, good idea, good way to differentiate, but don't just make it township right away. I think it's better to make it a classification of the project.
I agree.
In theory, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but in a lot of those projects, we would probably acquire some kind of like a permanent easement that
Yes.
would, so probably put a caveat in there for any municipally owned easement or public right of way.
I guess my other question is, do we think the cost for the contract will be higher because of the criteria that we put on them to comply? Does anybody know that would be?
Well, you have to be careful there. I mean, my view on that is if you're bidding a substantial project that requires trade skills, it's a competitive situation and we want qualified people who are going to do good work safely. And with that situation, you should get bids that are pretty much in line with one another for a substantial project like that.
Because they're all the same criteria.
Yeah, the same criteria, and they're going to have the same type of workforce. And, I don't see why you would expect, well, this is having this requirement of an apprenticeship program would make it a highly differentiated situation for the bid prices. Yeah, I don't see it.
Yeah, I think
And to John's point, if you do get a little bit in those situations, it could well be that contract's looking for scope creep, change orders to get back to high
Yeah,
price.
to get back up to the high.
And there's like a lot of other townships around here.
So Chester County, I think we'd be the first township, right? I don't think it's. So what's happened in the county? Is there any experience in the last year with county projects and surprises on bids, or is it not been, no one's been doing any work at the county level? I don't know.
I was not familiar with the county ordinance or resolution, so came forward. I'm happy to make some comments.
So let's try and get some actions here to drive this to the next step. So could we do a follow-up with the county and have a conversation with staff there around lessons learned from the implementation of their resolution a year ago? And then, is there a general board view that we should look to find a way to build in the differentiation that we talked about between the types of project and have Dave, Chris, and Rick work on language to modify this draft to show, or is it public easement or right of way? Is it there's one way to separate projects that would not require a high degree of typical trade involvement, and have those projects as kind of different categories? Is that what I'm hearing is the way forward?
And then also put a dollar amount associated, maybe there's different
Well, we
dollars.
can keep the dollar amount. Let's work that up, and then when we get the draft, we'll spend time debating a dollar amount. Then that would be a good way to do it.
Yeah, I think that for me, that seems like it would work by doing different types. And I feel more comfortable with that. There's too many circumstances. We're trying to merge them all together.
Well, it may take a couple of iterations to get this right.
I think it's a good thing. I think it's needed. And I think we just need to find a way to make it work. It's for everybody involved.
I mean, it's a possibility, like with item 11, which just gets into a punishment training program, to say this will not be applied towards projects within the public right of way. A simple one-line part.
Just be careful though, and if you read the Third Circuit case, you'll see the analysis that somebody's going to go, the court's going to go through. There has to be a rational, you have to identify your governmental purpose, you have to have a rational, you have to have, the way you draft the ordinance has to achieve that purpose. So I get weary of define the purpose, but then be careful about how you're carving out exceptions. We have to keep that in mind.
I'm using it the other way, though, Chris. I'm saying we can define responsible for certain types of projects. Responsible means, and this is all, I'm just thinking out loud, responsible in a project requires a significant amount of trade work, like electrical and plumbing, requires an apprenticeship program. Responsible for projects that don't require that degree of trade effort is mainly associated with stormwater, roadwork projects, which we're capturing under the umbrella of public right-of-way. As a way to categorize that, we see that as being responsible there means all the other things except, but you don't have to have.
Yeah, and I don't have that knowledge to know what trades it's really important to have an apprenticeship program in. I mean, I don't know that. I don't know if plumbing and electrical and mechanical, those are really the trades that you absolutely, it's critical to have an experienced contractor in, you know, in certain types of jobs, that the apprenticeship program is much more important versus, you know, a job in the road or in a sewer project. I just don't know enough about the industry, so to speak. I think that's where we're going to rely upon your staff and the Carroll Engineering to be able to come up with those recommendations for you.
Well, let's let them come up with a recommendation, and then you put your lens on it.
Sure.
Does this measure up to the scrutiny of the legal challenge?
Yeah.
Okay.
Happy to do that. And also talk to the county, I think that's important.
Yeah. So I'd like to open it up if there's any resident from West Goshen Township who would like to comment on this, who's here. Doug, you have your hand up.
Hi, Doug White. Christian, you've been here a long time. Has this topic come up before in prior boards, in prior projects? In other words, I'm not sure if you were here when we built this building, but you were here when we built the Public Works building. Have we had specific problems with contractors? Has this topic come up before with prior boards?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so we do have our board, we do have our bid specs, and that's what we've been going by all this time. But conceptually, it's a good idea to. So is it really necessary we do this, or do we refine it?
That's policy decision to the board.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Any other questions? Residents of West Goshen Township? All back.
Hi, my name is Nancy Lorbeck. I am a resident of West Goshen. I am so impressed with my supervisors. They are taking an issue, they are trying to get to the bottom of the issue, and they are trying to find a very reasonable answer. I wanted to put my 2 cents in. My 2 cents are that I support the idea of a responsible contractor because I think it can, number one, reduce the risk of contract failure, which can be a costly thing for the township. I think it leads to better quality services. And it, believe it or not, it can reduce hidden costs that come to taxpayers, maybe not township taxpayers, but all of us, when workers aren't paid enough money and then they have to get services from the government because, you know, their children need school lunches or they need food stamps or whatever. So it's a good way to make sure that workers are also receiving fair wages. As a resident, I do feel more comfortable that to know that people who are working on projects in our township are properly trained. That's something that's important to me. And about the issue you mentioned about you were worried that this, you didn't want, and I understand, you didn't want this ordinance or whatever it's called, if I'm not using the correct term, you didn't want it to weed out people who have done good work for us in the past. I understood that point. But I thought, as I heard that maybe what it could do is just improve the contractor instead of weeding them out. So just another thought. I thought as I was listening to this, something that someone once said to me that stuck in my mind. There is nothing in the world more expensive than cheap. And so what that person was saying is sometimes when you go for the cheapest, you end up paying a lot more money. So, and I do think it could work on large or small projects, but I do understand that you are trying to think carefully about what would be the threshold where it would kick in, and I appreciate all your conversation back and forth, and I want to thank you for it. So that's pretty much everything I had to say. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Nancy.
Sir, would you like to come up? You can say your name and address, please.
Right, my name is Thomas Delvecchio. I'm a resident of West Goshen Township. My address is 27 East Rhodes Avenue. I support this responsible contractor ordinance. I think a minimum of 10 hours of OSHA training is an industry standard. Like, we need to be safe, and we need to make sure our projects are carried out well. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, sir, at the back there.
Hi everyone, my name is Tom Mitchcomb. I'm a resident of West Goshen Township. I live at 907 West Town Road. I'm in favor of this ordinance because I think it creates a level playing field, as you said, and that would be for all the contractors. We would get a much safer, competent, and qualified contractor to do our work. Someone that's going to protect our environment, follow the rules and regulations for the environment. Also, that's going to pay our taxes, our 1% or income tax. We need to make sure that's coming back to the township. So I think all your ideas are great. I hope you give this consideration, and I'm in favor of the ordinance. So, thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Hi, Chris Pielli, West Goshen Township resident. Folks, thank you for letting me speak. I hope you're doing all well. My first question is, what the heck happened to the podium since I left? All right. I'm here as a West Goshen resident. I want to make that clear. And I do support the proposed responsible contractor ordinance. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for you folks. There's many different ways you can do it. You're discussing those ways, but the bottom line, the proposed contract itself, the reasoning behind it, always thinking of the health, safety, and welfare of your residents. And that means in new construction and what we do, we're responsible for. As a former supervisor, this is one of my priorities, but we really didn't have the support back then. We didn't have the benefit of all the other townships and the municipalities and the government entities. There's approximately 30 in this region alone that did enact it. And we didn't have the Third Circuit Court of Appeals case decided in April of 2020. Now, I want to clear up some misconceptions about this. You may hear that it's not precedential, and Kristen mentioned that it's narrow in the scope of ruling, that the responsible contracting may be a tenuous venture, and that you may be sued, but that's not an accurate picture. Let's talk about the precedent. It's worth noting that the only reason this case is non-precedental is solely because the case was unanimously decided by a panel of the Third Circuit judges, not the whole court. The appellant, ABC, for example, could have easily appealed for a full court hearing on this, but they decided they didn't. Kristen also mentioned the rational basis. So why didn't they? Because this case was a loser, folks, from the very beginning. They lost at the federal district court level. They appealed it. It's normal for a panel to hear the appeal. The Circuit Court of Appeals, it's right below the Supreme Court. 3 judges, I believe, unanimously said there's no case here. And if they were to appeal and ask for a full court hearing, then they'd have the full court listen to it. And I'm very certain that the full court would have said the same thing. And that would have been more of a significant legal blow to these folks who are against responsible contracting. So why is that? Kristen mentioned the rational basis test. The court rightly applied the rational basis test to the appellant's challenge. Folks, the rational basis test is an extremely high legal hurdle to overcome, and that the challenger, in this case those folks who are against the responsible contract, must show that the ordinance in question lacks any conceivable rational basis for legitimate government interest. Indeed, the challengers must negate every possible reason for the ordinance in order to prove that it's wholly irrational. So you can see how difficult it is to beat this proposed contracting ordinance. There is a rational basis. It's rational for a municipality to ensure that they contract a well-trained and experienced workforce. It's rational for West Goshen to want to have quality workmanship. We talked about contracts. It's up to you where you want to set the contract. You're talking about some of the businesses. Woody mentioned that they're afraid that they might lose. Change is hard. But the Recorder of Deeds office, we were just told there's a whole bunch of contracts we're going to have to do. We've been working with these vendors for 20 years, but there's laws out there saying you can't have contracts that long. It's tough. Change is hard. But guess what? We will survive. Woody, you mentioned the PennDOT program. You lost some folks there, some contractors, right? You said that there's some people you had to turn away. You had
they were low bid, but they didn't meet the PennDOT
right.
qualification.
So, but we survived.
But we have the PennDOT qualification to protect us.
Right.
That's why it's in there.
I guess my point is that a lot of things come down the pike, and we as government elected officials, we have to be able to adapt and go along with these laws. And I know I'm facing it up at the county. It's difficult, but it's rational to seek out contractors who take training and quality and safety so seriously that they've made the major investment and commitment to train their workforce through government-approved apprenticeship programs. Also heard folks talking about narrow scope when I talk about this stuff and how that ruling in the Third Circuit was narrow and it only dealt with one aspect of responsible contracting. And the reason why is because it dealt with apprenticeship programs. That has been the historical bone of contention of all people against responsible contracting. They don't want to put money into an apprenticeship program. Do you know why? Take a look at the ordinance. All the other provisions of responsible contracting are no-brainers. You got to have licensing. You have to have proper permits. You have to have bonds. These are no-brainers. They're not controversial. That case, although it was a narrow decision, talking just about apprenticeship, that was the essential narrow decision that needed to be decided. And it was decided clearly. So they don't want you to have apprenticeship programs. And I don't think that's rational. That's their whole reasoning. When they come out here and they attack this, they don't want it and they don't want you to want it. And I don't think that's rational. The fear of being sued, I can tell you in your own packets, every one of you have them. There's about 30 municipalities in southeast Pennsylvania. I ain't heard nothing about them getting sued. The ones that were listed there were sued with this case, some of them, and they won hands down. In fact, I just talked to Commissioner Moskowitz last night. I asked her, is there anything legally going on, any challenges? This thing's been in effect for over a year. And she said there's not a peep. So, listen, I've sat where you guys are sitting. I've seen a lot of crazy lawsuits. No one can guarantee there may not be, but that shouldn't ever, ever stop you from doing the right thing. And it shouldn't ever stop you from looking out for the safety, the health, and the welfare of your residents. And responsible contracting does that. So I ask you just to work hard on this. It's a standard. It's a good standard. It doesn't have to be an either or. There can be and also. You can work something out. But please don't give up on this. West Goshen deserves something like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, sir. Sorry. It's okay. We'll get to you.
Good evening. My name is Kevin McDevitt, 27-year resident of West Goshen Township, 27-year voter of West Goshen Township. I live at 812 Montclair Drive. I am an IBEW member. I did serve an apprenticeship, and it is very important for training to serve an apprenticeship. John Helm was actually my training director, too, as a matter of fact. Not only are you well trained with the apprenticeship, but it will also probably help keep out illegal aliens and such like a contractor just might hire people off the street, go to Wawa, pick people up. We don't have this language in the ordinance. If if you have the apprenticeship, every apprentice has to be an American citizen. You have to have a social security number and such. So I'm in favor of the ordinance, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Dennis Rustin. I'm a resident of West Goshen Township. Live over at 431 Willow Way. I am a resident of West Goshen because I live, work, and pay my taxes here because I learned my trade under the Registered Apprenticeship Program. Responsible is the key word here. If low bidders on public bids in our township can prove they have the technical capabilities, personnel, and financial resources to complete the work, then this RCO is a good idea. I am in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to comment? Yes, sir.
My name is Dave. Sorry. My name is Dave Saunders. I am from West Goshen Township. My address is 1255 Tanager Lane. I am in favor of this. I believe the responsible contractor ordinance, which helps ensure the responsible part of the lowest responsible bidder on public funded projects, will protect the taxpayers from contractors that perform inferior work. I personally went through an apprenticeship. I know how important it is to be trained correctly. I've seen inferior work before on jobs. People can get very hurt from it. It could also cost taxpayers a lot of money. So I am truly in favor of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Okay, so we've had a board discussion. Is there any other board comment, having heard from the public, or any other direction you want to provide staff and the solicitor?
Okay, just lay it out, what exactly are we going to, what are we doing here?
So I think, unless the board corrects me, I think the direction was for staff to work with Kristen on working on the ordinance that we already have, the draft ordinance that we already have, and trying to look at having a criteria related to those projects that involve public right-of-way. Rick had some build on the actual language for that, and to have those particular projects not require an apprenticeship program. So that any other type of project that would certainly involve a high degree of plumbing, electrical, carpentry, masonry type work would have that requirement that we have in the draft at the moment. We don't know exactly what that language will look like. We're asking staff to put their thinking hats on. We're asking Chris to make sure it fits in with the ability to legally stand up to the idea of being a responsible piece of the way that language means, what that language means. Well, that's the direction I've heard us go for tonight.
I have a quick question.
Just let me just finish. Will we then have this draft in place for our next meeting in February for us to discuss?
All of the staff, because you've got 2 weeks to the next meeting. Is that something you can get sorted out, or do you want to put it to the March 1st meeting?
March 1st, I think, would be more appropriate.
I just want to say, John, I think this is a good document. It's needed. It's important for the township. If you need any help, I'm glad to help you. I want this to work.
Yeah, exactly. We'll just make it happen. So then March 1st will be our, we'll have an ordinance in place for us to discuss, and then make a decision when advertising. Is that
right? We may talk about the dollar amount and nail that down in March 1st. We may fine tune any language in it. But yeah, we should be in a position to make a motion to adopt it, to advertise.
To advertise for adoption at the last meeting in March, but March 1st will be when it will have a draft. Okay.
So is it a 30-day notice for advertisement, Kristen?
No, 7th is the 7th working.
Oh, yeah, because there's another zoning.
And then we'll also have a question in county also.
Yeah, we're going to get some feedback. Okay. Ashley has a question.
Sure. Yeah, it's just for my own clarification. I'm not a part of these trades. I don't really know. We have a lot of tradespeople in the audience, and John. Does it concern you at all when you look at even the smaller projects under this threshold that we're talking about being done by unqualified workers? And so I'm trying to keep I'm trying to keep this in focus. A lot of the places that we've looked at have this threshold that this will kick in when it reaches like the bigger projects. But like you said, it's like even the smaller projects matter. And so it concerns me a little bit. I know that this would be going against the grain of a lot of established ordinances that are already out there, but it concerns me a little bit to think that those are anyhow less important than the big projects because you want them all done correctly. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, since we're talking about carving out a particular kind of project, namely public right-of-way projects, maybe we want to think about having a lower threshold. Instead of 250, make it something lower than that, 150 maybe?
Well, I think what I'd like to do is get some information from staff around, as you look ahead the next 5 years, knowing the typical projects that we have on our plate, whether it's to do with stormwater, sewer, township-related projects, upgrades that are needed, provide a list of projects of kind of order of magnitude cost, excuse me, so that can form the board to think through what dollar threshold will be right. So, you know, we don't want it to be too high so that, you know, almost maintenance level work is falling into the kind of category, but we don't want it too low that almost maintenance work is falling. We want it too high to Ashley's point that it's like, let's only these huge $1 million projects we don't have anything on. You know, in the next 5 years, we're only going to be building as far as I see. So we need to find the right balance, and we need some information to inform that decision. So it would help to have a list of this, either historical list, plus a projection of what's going forward. These are the range of projects we expect to see. This is the type of projects they are, and these are the kind of costs that might be involved in them. I know it's a big ask, but again, it's just to give us something to work with. So.
I think the dollar figure is put in place to recognize the fact that the administrative work involved in complying with the ordinance and then having your staff sift through and evaluate the information provided. At some point, the administrative cost could exceed the price of the contract. I think that's why they're trying to, that's my thought on why they're establishing a limit. That if it's a $20,000 project, but it takes a contractor, you know, $5,000 worth of staff time to put it all together, and then it takes your staff another, I mean, I don't know, that's one of the things I'm thinking of why they put a threshold.
Well, I do want to understand more what is involved in evaluating whether someone who submitted a bid is a responsible contractor. Because if they're a known entity and they've submitted for one project a list of all the information that's needed to show that they're responsible, including what's needed for their subs, you know, if you do it again 12 months later on a similar kind of work and they bid again, is it like we're going to go through the same exercise?
Well, yeah, they fill out your paperwork. It is.
Well, it's definitely not our paperwork.
That's what I'm saying. It costs them as a contractor time and effort, administrative costs. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. At some point, if the project isn't, the profit they're going to make on it, you know, isn't enough for them to put that administrative time into it. That's just my thought process of why these ordinances would have a minimum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just for clarification, I can share with you from West Norrington what their bidder qualification form looks like. It's really a rather simple exercise, really. It's all just yes and no answers to the questions of the 15 stipulations within the ordinance. And then they attach to that contractor form, which is supplied by the township, the letters from the apprenticeship program verifying that it's a modified apprenticeship program. That's it. Not a big deal.
I do agree. It's not a thing, you know, it's not like hours and hours of work.
It's not.
Once
But
you
then
put
is
your
your staff going to go and verify those facts?
Well,
I mean, that's part of it, I think.
You might spot do that. You might do it on the first time they've ever bid on a project. My question was, do they do it every time they bid? Probably not. I don't think you have to.
Do you have to treat it like on every separate project? You have to treat it like its own thing where you have to go back and look at them? Yes, you're saying yes.
Well,
Because you're defeating the purpose of the ordinance, you know,
Yeah,
right?
you don't
Well,
know
no,
what
but
may
if
have
they
happened in 2
fill it out
years.
once.
The ordinance
Yeah,
says if you
something
falsely plan, if you say, no, I'm fine, I've not been, you know, fined or anything, and it comes to light, then there's consequences to that. We don't have to go search public records to say, was this company fined for an OSHA violation or not? If they're certified on a submission to a bid that they're responsible and they haven't, we don't have to go and double check that, it's my view.
And if they've met all the criteria, they saw.
We may want to do that occasionally, but it's not a requirement to do it every bid, and every bid is documented.
Yeah, once a contractor does good.
I remember sitting where you guys were, what verification process do we have now? I mean, we go check, do we knock on a door, do we inspect?
Well, yeah, they go through the bid back.
Anybody can apply,
that's on them. They'll be breaking the law. That would be a crime. That's a government document that they would falsify. So I want to let something like, I've seen the applications John are talking about. This is something I'm very interested in. It's not a high hurdle to overcome. Not that difficult to do.
And also the advantage of doing an ordinance as opposed to a resolution. With an ordinance, you could have a consequence attached to committing a fraudulent entry on the certification form. They wouldn't be able to bid for a period of 3 years. In the ordinance. Part of the ordinance.
You could have that by resolution. That same provision could be in your resolution. The ordinance would be whether you wanted to take them through like a civil enforcement process or some sort of finding process. So your resolution, the county resolution probably has the same language. The ordinance factor would be whether you wanted to have a fine associated with a violation.
Okay. Well, we're moving back the ordinance route. I know the county did a resolution here. So. Okay, so are we clear on staff? What direction we go with staff? Is there any other bills? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, next on the agenda is item number 5. Which is Aram Avenue, discussion regarding the dedication of Aram Avenue and the punch list prepared by Township Engineer and Director of Public Works. So a little bit of background on this one. Previously, the Township has been approached by Breezer Land Development, the developer of the Woodlands of Greystone, requesting consideration of dedication of Aram Avenue to the Township prior to full completion of residences, which is a requirement that was included as part of the original conditional use approval for land development. So the board can better understand the situation, the township engineer was requested to have Aram Avenue inspected and prepare a punch list of items requiring correction by the developer before the road could be dedicated to the township. Additionally, inquiries were made with PennDOT regarding whether, after dedication, the township could add Aram Avenue to the list of township roads eligible to receive a liquid fuels contribution if it were covered by an ongoing maintenance agreement with the cost being paid for by the developer. So that's what we're talking about on item. This agenda item. Rick, you want to give us an update on the effort you've been putting in the last couple of months?
Well, Dave and I did conduct an inspection of Aram Avenue over several different days. We identified 42 items that required correction. Some of those are relatively minimal, some of them are relatively large and time-consuming. Dave also checked with municipal services with PennDOT, and we're pretty well constrained. We either dedicate the road and get liquid fuels funding for it and we maintain it, or we don't. There's not a lot of latitude to have the contractor pay for anything once we dedicate it if it goes on liquid fuels roll. The other concern that we have as staff is that a lot of the items on this list have the potential to be recurring during the construction process. Construction has damaged some of these items now. Construction has the potential to damage them in the future. And we are concerned about being responsible for maintaining a roadway that is being damaged by a contractor prior to the construction being completed. That's our major concern. Dave, did I miss anything?
That's it.
So you're not recommending that the township should consider dedication of this road at this time?
I have been firmly against the township accepting dedication of this road prior to completion of construction since the beginning of this process. And now that we've completed it and identified what we've identified, I am now firmly more against taking dedication of the roadway. But that's my recommendation, your decision.
Thank you, Rick. So, board questions for Rick or Dave?
Yeah, I do. On the punch list of items, January 2022, two things. Have they prioritized the critical items, and also have the time frame been associated with each of the items?
Well, no, we can't really do that, first of all, in order to accept dedication, there's no such thing as a priority. Everything on this list has to be done to our satisfaction. As far as time frame, we can't give you that because it's up to the contractor to determine how to fix some of these. Like I said, a number of these can be fixed relatively quickly and relatively simply, but there are some others, such as the drainage problem at the eastern roundabout, that could easily take 6 months to correct, or maybe even more, and that's some cost. And there would also need to be a period of evaluation where we make sure that what they correct actually works. So there's a broad range of issues here. This is a very large project. It's a very complicated project, and it's a very long-term project. And you know, this is not something that we typically deal with, a project of this magnitude. So, you know, the severity of issues and the number of issues is greater due to the scope of the project than you might normally get on a smaller subdivision. But again, my concern is that there are going to be ongoing construction-related issues with the road that we will have no control over, and yet will still be responsible for dealing with. And the other issue I think that you need to be aware of is there's liability, significant liability involved in this as well. You know, if the contractor doesn't put a sign back up and somebody gets hurt, yeah, they're probably going to get sued. But conversely, we're going to get sued, you know, also if that's our responsibility to do that. So I think we're assuming a lot of responsibility for the contractor that we normally would not assume, and I would submit we should not assume.
And the developers knows as they're getting materials delivered or knocking signs down left and right. If the developer isn't on them to not do that, once it becomes ours, they're really not going to care.
Right. I noticed that some of them stop signs are missing at the now. I'm concerned with that too.
It's an ongoing problem. It's unfortunately due to the nature of the street being a little large street that's separated by a median. When you bring large construction trucks in carrying trusses and large lumber panels and stuff like that, you know, if the driver isn't extremely careful driving through there, they're just knocking stuff over. They're hitting guide rails, they're knocking signs over, they're damaging fences. You know,
when Rick and I were out there, we almost took out our signal pole.
So the question is, and so I'm just going back here, when we first looked at this, the idea was we would do our inspections, they would come up with a list of items, and then after these items were fixed and repaired, then we would assume township dedication and it would be the township's road. What you're saying is that a lot of these are going to take months to fix, years to fix, and that you're not comfortable assuming dedication before these are.
Yes, the recommendation was never for you to accept dedication until these were done.
It was what we continued discussing.
Okay. And there's no, so, okay, there's still a lot of construction going on. What you're concerned about is also just continued damage while all that construction is going on.
That's correct. I mean, we have 3 to 4 years of construction left. We're only a third of the way done this project. We have roughly 200 units out of almost 600 that are built.
And so is there additional protection that the township can have while construction is continuing to be performed if we accept the dedication of the road?
Not really. I mean, if you're part of your liability coverage, but yeah. Just to frame the issue a little bit, the reason why you'd even be considering taking dedication was the issue of the school. And the school district telling you that they weren't going to drive on the road if it wasn't dedicated.
But we
That
didn't
has no
get
longer.
a letter from them. That was just a verbal kind of comment from someone. We've never received a letter from the school district.
No, the school district representative had told us that. I mean, in
Told the
conversation.
board.
He told me, I mean, he told the Bella Greco that the school district's policy was to not drive on an undedicated road. That situation seems to have resolved itself, at least for now. They've been riding on that road. So, you know, whether they come back and change their position, I don't know, but they're riding on that road right now. The school district is riding on that road.
And the kids' bus stops are along that road?
There are bus stops along the road, and buses other than serving the Woodland
something happens right now, as of now, it's on the developer.
Yes.
Correct.
Then if they're using, because exactly, so my whole issue was the school, and it is, and the parents. But if they're using that, and the school is using it, and they're fine with it, I see no reason to, right, yeah. Right.
But another aspect of this, which I don't think we've touched on, is there's been some suggestion that we do dedicate the section of Aaron Avenue, which is under the school district, owned by the school district, which is from Pottstown Pike to the driveway to the elementary school. Dave and I evaluated that. We don't have any problem with dedicating that section of roadway.
Okay.
Roadway's in good condition. There's no significant issues there. It would in fact allow us to bring Wrangler Court onto liquid fuels list.
And you're maintaining it now anyway, right?
We're maintaining it now anyway.
I sent that deed to Chris in email, I think today, or yesterday, I can't remember now. I have the deed in my possession, the original deed from the school district. I've been holding on to it, and I sent it to Chris. If the board wants to put that on the agenda for the next meeting, that's up to you guys.
I think that we should do that.
Is there any signage on that section of road that's vulnerable?
There is some signage, but that area is wider than the rest of Boulevard Street. And the other issue there is a significant amount of the deliveries come in off of Phoenixville Pike. So both of those work in our favor there.
Would the traffic study that you're requiring to establish the basis for the 25 miles an hour, would that be?
I don't think that would really need to be done until we take dedication of the full street. The area directly, the area between Pottstown Pike and the school, I think, is easily classified as a residential district under the vehicle code. So 25 mile an hour could be justified there, at least on a short-term basis. I would like to have at some point in time before the entire road is dedicated, I would like to have a traffic study by a qualified traffic engineer. And we would prefer a 25 mile an hour speed limit, but it needs to be legally justifiable under the vehicle code. And that has not been done, and we would want to do that for the entire road.
Is that the standard for like school zones, or is that
No.
just for residential neighborhoods?
That's residential.
So we're not really talking about a school zone?
No, the school zone would be a whole different thing with flashers and 15 mile an hour.
Would the school district want that? Would they be reaching out for
School
that?
district has not approached us about that. Again, things have kind of morphed or changed over time since this project started. You know, we were originally assured when the school went under design that there would be no pedestrian traffic to the school. And yet, we've got all kinds of pedestrian traffic to the school. And quite frankly, why shouldn't we have pedestrian traffic to the school? We've got a perfectly good 8-foot wide pathway there. We've got crosswalks established. I mean, I think pedestrian traffic is a good thing.
Well, we did have one resident come in and want the school zone.
Right.
They were referred to the school district.
We've heard nothing. Now, here's the other thing too. You know, eventually somewhere down the road, if there is pedestrian traffic, we probably should put it in a school zone. But we can't determine that. We can't really make that request. That's up to the school district. And if they're still kind of in denial that there's pedestrian traffic, they may not be at that point yet. But if they come to the point where they do want to do that, we can certainly evaluate that and put a school zone in there if it's warranted.
I guess that's up to the school district.
It is, yeah.
So I guess that area that you would approve to be considered for a township road, but the traffic study is still required, which is part of that road.
No. We don't need any traffic studies at this point to dedicate from Pottstown Pike to the school district driveway. We're good there. That the traffic study wouldn't be needed until we do the entire roadway.
Now, you mentioned that that section of road is in pretty good shape. Now, as part of the conditional use for the developer, they're supposed to put an 1.5 inch of final paving on the entire Aram Avenue. Would they also need to have that done there also?
Absolutely. The entire length from Pottstown Pike to Phoenixville Pike.
But if we take dedication over of that one little section there, would then that mean the developer would say, I don't want to do it, or would not have to do it?
Too bad, it's required.
Yeah, but Rich, does that run afoul of the PennDOT? What PennDOT guidance is telling you that we can't have a private developer do maintenance on one of our
We
roads?
can't accept money for.
Yeah, we can't accept money
Okay,
for it, we
you have
can
to do
certainly
it.
have to do it.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, and we have no intention of, double dipping on that, we just want the resurfacing done.
So if you put Rangley cul-de-sac on the liquid fuel system, you wouldn't put that little section of Iron out anymore?
No, because we dedicate that section of Aaron, we can now get liquid fuels for Rangley. Rangley Court's an orphan right now, it doesn't come out to a dedicated public street, so we can't get liquid fuels for it.
Okay, but the Iron Avenue itself, including the section we would take over from the school district, you wouldn't put that on a liquid fuels list for the whole thing?
No, I would put it on because it's,
We would.
yeah, but just that small section.
Just a small section.
Right, that's what I'm getting at. We were talking about, you got a ruling from the PennDOT folks about we couldn't put that on the inventory if we did dedication for snow maintenance reimbursement.
Right, we can't get reimbursed, we can't take money from the developer for any work out there. We can require them to do overlay over.
Yeah.
Right.
And other road maintenance such as putting up signs or replacing signs or guardrails.
No, in that little section, we would be responsible for everything. But we're already maintaining it.
We're already
now.
doing the signs and the
I'm
piles.
just trying to verify it would not jeopardize us receiving any liquid fuels funding for, okay.
Not for that
That's
section.
why we get that clarification.
So I support putting this on the agenda for our next meeting.
The dedication of that section. Yeah, well, Chris has got the deed over Chris, we'll bring it forward, right? Yeah. I've got a question for you, for Rick and Dave. So was there anything else on this punch list that you feel is a safety risk and that you should be let the developer know about, like that large dead tree?
That
You
large-
know how they don't see anything until you tell them.
That large dead tree worries me.
Well, we can certainly make the developer aware of that. We've already made the developer aware in writing because
Of that tree or?
not of the tree.
Well, they have a list though.
They have the list?
Yeah, they have this list.
Yeah.
All right.
So, yeah, they actually have a whole list now, but we had already put them in a notice in writing of the drainage issue
Yeah.
because of ice.
That came up at the freeze.
Yeah.
That's why it's about prioritizing some of these issues, that where you can prioritize.
Yeah, and unfortunately, even though that's one of the highest priority issues, we can't deal with it until spring because we can't correct it with frozen ground. So, yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments for Rick and Dave? We have a way forward to just look at the dedication of that one section with subsequent meeting.
Can I just ask a brief question? Are any of the residents who are dealing with this damage as the trucks are coming through, are we having any issues with residents there being upset with it?
No, the only issue that we have on a recurring basis is dirt on the roadway, which is very typical for a large construction project. And our inspectors are continuing to hound the contractors to keep their rock construction entrances clean and keep the road clean and sweep it when necessary. The residents that have moved in there, the roads that they're living on are also not dedicated yet. And they're literally living in a construction zone. So that's one of the things that you just deal with when you buy a house in a development that's under construction. So, it hasn't been an issue at this point.
Okay, is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on this agenda item? Doug?
Rick, is it historically true that we always wait till the construction is finished completely to receive the roads?
In the 22 years that I've been here, we have never accepted dedication until the construction is complete.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to agenda item number 6, which is discussion and possible approval of a proposal from HRG Inc. for amendment to West Goshen Township's pollutant reduction plan. And Chris is the lead for this one.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, before the board this evening is a proposal from HRG to complete amendments to the township's pollution reduction plan. It's my understanding this had previously been discussed, and the proposal notes that the township's pollution reduction plan is outdated. and doesn't match the sediment reduction requirements in our current MS4 permit. So an addendum would be drafted to the current PRP to update the portions that no longer align with the township's plan. The cost outlined in the proposal is $13,000. I had Mr. Craig review the proposal, and I don't want to put words in Rick's mouth, but based on his review, he believes that the work is needed primarily due to issues with a previous project, the Basin Road project, which was a significant portion of the township's approved pollution reduction plan. And Mr. Craig's review also determined that the work is sufficient and the costs are reasonable. As the board's aware, HRG was authorized to do an analysis of the township's corrugated metal piping and a study regarding the implementation of a stormwater fee. In terms of the corrugated metal piping, I provided an update from Sean Fabian to the board. Rick and I also met with Tyler Erb from HRG on Monday to go over where we stand with the stormwater fee, and they're still working on the budget items. But we should have a draft that can be shared to the board hopefully by the end of this week, and a timeline for completion as well.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm going to kick this one off. So my preference is to not take action on this tonight. I'd like to have this new board see the work product quality from HRG, from the couple of the projects we've already commissioned with them, so the two that we've just discussed. As you said, we should be getting a draft right this next week. I'd like to see that shared with the board understand it, and be able to be more comfortable, I would think, with continuing to give new work to HRG at this point. We have commissioned a lot of work with them, and I'd like the board to be able to see a product work package on. So that's just my suggestion.
I appreciate that, Tony. I agree.
Just the board is aware, what the draft will look like is it'll look like a budget, so to speak, about how it would be, about how everything would be structured in terms of the utility fee, and then the memo for timeline of completion.
I would expect to see a little bit more underpinning information behind it too. So I'd like to see whatever the basis calculation, the general description of the basis behind that presentation.
I just had one question relative to Exhibit 1 on the scope of services. Number 5, they're going to submit, obviously, to DEP, DEP. Do the costs include responses back to DEP comments? Is that extra? Because that could be time-consuming also, going back and forth with comments that DEP may make relative to the submittal.
Talking about number 6?
Well, it's not. It's number 5.
Which page do you want?
Well, number 6, I think, answers that question, because it says they will respond to PADEP and public comments as they relate to the addendum and revise as necessary.
Okay.
But just so the board's aware, that it can be a very tedious process, and it can be very time-consuming, particularly with DEP out of the office still. So if we get to the point where DEP is going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, like they did the first and second time we did this, it would not be unreasonable for any consultant to ask for a revision to the scope because of those excessive revisions.
And that's why
DEP is notorious for doing that.
Why is DEP out of the office?
COVID.
Okay.
As far as I understand, all the state agencies are still working.
Look, I'm just going to say this. I think it is ludicrous that we are busting our rear ends to meet standards for a department that's not even in their office. So I am absolutely...
Your state rep, because you're begging for you.
Madam Vice Chair, we agree with you.
We run a little hard to say.
I am not running like there's a fire behind me to meet their demands when they're not even in their jobs. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
The issue, I completely agree with your sentiment. The issue is there are legislative requirements that we have to meet, and to Ms. Camp's point.
Well, then I challenge them to show up to one of our meetings and tell us that to our face. If they go to work,
they won't.
If they go to work then I will not.
And the biggest problem is not that they're beating on us to accelerate our process. Our biggest problem is getting answers out of them so we can respond and get something approved.
This is why, though, I don't, look, this is why I have reservations about making this scope of work, these projects that we're talking about. I get that we need to do them. I understand the reasoning behind it. But this is why I have reservations about putting this burden on our residents at this moment because of COVID and many other factors, making it seem like we're in a race against time to meet these requirements when I don't think the DEP is going to be knocking on our door asking for, I just don't.
Well, here's the other two issues with that. Number one is, unfortunately, it's not just DEP, it's EPA, who has jurisdiction over an independent authority to come in here and tell us we're not doing what we're supposed to.
Are they at work?
Huh?
Are they at work?
As far as I know.
Perfect now.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, too, is the reason for the need for this change is if we do a project without DEP approval of it being part of our TMDL PRP program, they may not give us credit for doing the project. So by getting this application in there and getting these projects on the books, one of which is the Idlewild Basins that we are just in the process of finishing, we get on record that, we want these to be part of our program. Because if we wait a year or even longer, they could say, well, you did that a year ago, so we're not going to count it. So, and unfortunately, people have been in that
And that's
situation
my
before.
concern working with DEP.
Yeah.
Costs would escalate high, because I know how they are and how they work, and
Yeah.
running back and forth, and,
Yeah.
answers, and okay, and clarify it, and now it should approve, and.
Yeah, so, we're not really trying to do this because we, particularly want to do it. I'm just trying to protect the township so that we get credit for what we are doing, because we are doing a significant amount of work, which a lot of places are not. And we want to make sure we get credit for it. So that's the need for this change.
Particularly to your point, I think, if there is a back and forth, HRG say, look, we've more than burned through what we anticipated when we wrote the scope, we'll have a conversation with them. We obviously have a good working relationship with HRG. I would expect them to be somewhat amenable to sharing some of the pain, or we would cross that bridge when it comes to it. I think for the purposes of this scope, it's fine.
And so, and just not to go on a train of bashing DEP, but I can tell you when it comes to their comments, I don't know what the experience here was in West Goshen, but when I was in Malvern, we submitted our updated pollution reduction plan to DEP in November of 2017, and we got comments back on March 2nd, 2020.
It took 3 years, a little over 3 years to get our plan approved.
We were in a similar boat, and I believe then, once you have approval, I believe you then have 5 years to complete it.
Correct.
Now, I know there were extensions under the previous permits. Whether or not that occurs this time around remains to be seen, but you do have a limited period of time in which to meet the requirements.
Okay, so for this agenda item tonight, I'm hearing no action. We do want to see some work product from HRG. We expect to see this back on March 15th.
February 15th?
February 15th. Meeting. Okay, good questions? Margie?
Just for clarification purposes, is this the 2018 through 2023 permit that we're talking about?
No, it's the 2019 through 2024 permit.
Okay, so, all right, backtrack a little bit. Can we go back to the original HRG scope of service and contract that I believe we entered into in 2014? I believe that was in the neighborhood of, if my memory serves me correctly, maybe $42,000. I don't know if that was a flat fee or we paid it, in installments or by the hour. But because the process back in 2015-16 was terminated, I'm not sure, perhaps we may have already paid for some of these services, but because it was terminated, we didn't get the
Well,
services?
first of all, you're talking about two different things. We're talking about an amendment to the PRP TMDL program, and you're talking about the fee study. So let's make sure we're on the same page.
No,
here.
wasn't the PRP and TMDL part of our submission to
Yeah,
get?
but that has nothing to do with the fee study that you're talking about.
I'm not talking about the fee study, I'm talking about the whole program. The whole PRP situation. So,
So hang on, so do we use HRG to prepare some of our permit submission documents?
Yeah, they submitted all of it, they prepared all of them.
So what you're saying with that contract that they did, was there something that was not done and paid
No.
for? That's a question, I think.
No, nothing outstanding from that original
So
contract.
whatever invoices were submitted, I think the work completed and paid at the time.
okay. This is something, I don't know if there's been, this is off a law firm, I think in York. There currently exists a bit of discrepancy between what the United States EPA views as a stormwater system and how the Pennsylvania DEP interprets stormwater system. So the EPA believes that everything within a local jurisdiction constitutes the local stormwater system, where Pennsylvania DEP asserts that only the portions of the stormwater system not dedicated and not located on private lands constitutes a local stormwater system. Has this been determined one way or the other? Because I have always suggested that we shouldn't be doing projects on private land if by law, by Pennsylvania law, by DEP, PADEP, that we don't need to include stormwater basins that are on private land as part of our system.
So what that says is that facilities on private property are not part of our MS4. That's our MS4 permit. That's what that says. They're privately owned, and we're not responsible for them. We agree with that. The problem is DEP's interpretation is as soon as the water from those facilities touches our facilities, it's all now our responsibility. So, no, we don't own those. No, we're not responsible to maintain them, according to DEP, although DEP is changing their tune on that in a couple of townships. But as soon as the water hits our MS4, which it inevitably does everywhere, it's now our problem. So, whether we own it and maintain it or not, we're responsible for that water and mitigating those problems. And our MS4 permit requires us to do that to a certain extent under the TMDL PRP program, and we have to do that. And since we only own 4 detention basins out of 215, the only way to accomplish that requirement is to do it on private property. We don't like doing it on private property. We prefer not to do it on private property, but it's absolutely impossible to do it any other way. So there we are.
Okay, yeah, the same firm has said, and I didn't print it out or I left it somewhere at the house, but it said that municipalities should be careful because they might be overmapping their system because...
Well, we didn't overmap our system because we're responsible for the entire urbanized area within West Goshen Township. And unfortunately, with the way West Goshen Township is populated, our entire boundaries are an urbanized area. So there's no area that we could parse out or delete from our system because we are too densely populated. There are some townships that can do that, and many have, but we're not one of them.
And that was my next question about parsing areas out, because it's my understanding that because DEP has their own, not DEP, PennDOT has their own stormwater permit, that we could parse out the roads that are PennDOT roads. And so
we would parse out only the roadway right-of-way owned by PennDOT, and as soon as it touches a township street, then it becomes our problem. So there is literally nowhere in the township that we can parse. Parsing out a little roadway right-of-way for 202 or Westchester Pike or Paoli Pike has absolutely no impact on our overall stormwater requirements.
But when we figured out the reduction of the load from our new street sweeper program, did we include township or PennDOT roads in that calculation?
We don't sweep PennDOT roads, we only sweep township.
Well, that's what I'm asking you, sir. If we are calculating...
But that has nothing to do with parsing.
Well, it has to do with the load calculation and how much you have to reduce. So if we're saying we have...
No, it doesn't.
Okay, I'm trying to understand it, and I'm
Okay.
thinking my
It
questions
does
might be
not.
helpful to the board members as well, so I appreciate your patience. Thank you. Go ahead.
So, yeah, we do reduce our suspended solids by street sweeping. We cannot sweep PennDOT roads, or we might want to, because that would help us further reduce it. But the loads remain the same because we also get the loads from the PennDOT streets, whether we can sweep them or not sweep them. So they are not parsed out, but we are not sweeping them because they're not our property.
Okay, and then in the original plan that was submitted a number of years ago, it said the street sweeping schedule was only from April until or through October. Is that still the case? Are we sweeping more?
Sweep whenever we can.
We're sweeping whenever we can because the requirements for street sweeping that we are allowed to get credit for require significantly greater sweeping. So we're trying to do every month if we can, if it's not frozen. And it's possible that won't be good enough for DEP, but we're doing everything we can.
Okay, so I'm just asking someone on staff or someone to look at the plan again, because what I printed out many years ago was just showing a reduction for TSS for sweeping from April through October. So if we're doing it more, we might be able to capture a greater reduction.
We are recording everything we take off the street as far as tonnage, and we will attempt to apply it to our requirements to the best of our abilities. We're going to get everything we can possibly get.
Okay. Is there any way we can use the remediation or the dam work at the Woodlands of Greystone project as part of the PRP or TMDL plan? I mean, why not?
Which remediation, Dam 181?
Well, can't we use those projects as part of our plan to reduce?
They don't do anything to reduce it. That dam only meets our current requirements. It doesn't exceed our current requirements, and unless it did so, there's no credit that we can take for it. Okay, the other two dams are not stormwater dams, so there's no possibility there.
Okay. And the proposal lists 4 projects that you're adding to the plan, but it doesn't mention the projects that are being eliminated. Is there a way to get that information, or?
The project being eliminated is Basin Road.
Okay. Originally when I was involved back in 2015-16, I had a 2.5-hour conversation on the phone with a gentleman at DEP. I went in later and sat there for 2 hours and had a file review. And when he looked at the plan that HRG did, and they're a fantastic engineering company, they do really nice work, but he looked at that plan and he said, this is not what we were looking for. I mean, how much money must this have cost? I mean, he just thought it was overkill. He wasn't looking for townships, municipalities to spend 30, 40, and then another 10 for fee, determination and another amendment. I mean, we're spending so much money, and this plan shouldn't be costing $60,000. So I appreciate that you're not moving forward with it, and thank you for taking my comments and extra time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You may be moving forward as much next time we meet. Well, I understand your point about, sometimes they issue new laws and new requirements. They don't know what they're looking for until they see it, and then they decide that's what we like. And then, like Tina was saying, it's back and forth. It consumes time while people redo things for them. So they do create a lot of problems when there's a new permit regulation issue and we're trying to comply with it. I do think HRG does good work. Probably, expensive work in some ways, but I'd rather be compliant and at the top of the list in terms of quality than poor, shoddy work and get scrutinized and say your projects aren't good enough and all the rest of it.
But all the work we're doing in the township, they're not.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? Thank you. All right, moving on to agenda item number 8. Update on the vehicle purchase for the West Goshen Township Police Department.
Number 7. We got to
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. Number 7.
Yeah.
I was like, it's 8 o'clock.
We're gonna kick him out of West Goshen.
You should have said the
It's 8 o'clock, it's time to break. Number 7, discussion and possible approval of the township manager's residency pursuant to section 7-3 of the West Goshen Township Code of Ordinances. Chris. This is related to our township manager residence requirement. Was this as part of the packet that was in the agenda? Was this put out? Did you put this on the public website?
No, I did not.
Go ahead then.
Mr. Chairman, under section 7.3 of the West Goshen Township Code of Ordinances, it states that the township manager may reside outside of the township subject to the approval of the Board of Supervisors. It must be done within 60 days of appointment. Currently, I reside 4.6 miles from this building.
Very good. So,
Oh,
are we going to make Chris sweat a little bit?
I spend more time driving into town than I do not.
Yeah, even though I think you're really missing out by not living here.
Because the board is aware there are certain circumstances that prevent me from relocating.
Yes, we understand.
Okay, so is there any board questions or comments for Chris, or would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
So the motion is to approve the Chris's residency outside of the West Goshen Township. Is there any public comment or questions?
I just have a comment for an amendment possibly in the future that it, instead of saying West Goshen Township, it is Greater Westchester area, so the Westchester Area School District, because I do think it is limiting. I have a problem with, previous staff living so far away, but because our boundaries, and I have 5 different municipalities within 5 miles of my house. So if it's in the Greater or the Westchester Area School District, I think that's a reasonable radius.
Thank you, Carmen. And Chris, when he was reviewing this township manager requirement, did indicate that, as you made the point before, this particular ordinance, whatever this requirement is, does need a revision. It's out of date and isn't reflective of what we want. So we probably will have an action to look at this and update it, and that might be something we can build in. Thank you. So a motion and a second. Any other public comments? You're ready to take a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say no. Passes 5-0. You can go back to the same place you came from. So
Thank you.
Okay, now on to agenda item number 8, update on the vehicle purchase for the West Goshen Township Police Department, included in the township's capital improvement plan for this year. And let's see, so Chief Carroll is here. Thank you for being here, Chief. I'm going to try to phrase it, and if I get it wrong, let me know. So as we've explored the actual purchase and issuing a purchase order for the vehicle, the actual cost has risen compared to what we put in the budget 4 or 5 months ago when we were preparing the budget. So originally the budget was $48,000 for a Tesla. This would replace the existing Ford Explorer XLT. The price now is $52,440, which exceeds the remaining money that was budgeted for new police vehicles, which is only $50,081.24 remaining. So while that cost has increased beyond the original budget amount and what is remaining, overall we believe it will not negatively impact the total budget for the police department, because the actual fit out for the vehicle will be less than was budgeted, and therefore we believe the total will be hopefully a little bit less than what the overall cost was budgeted for. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Any board questions or comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
When can we all get a ride?
Well, I think it
I
depends
know
on
that I
the
think it
road.
actually did go. I think it's right.
Yeah.
I had a ride.
And you better hurry up in order before the price goes up again.
So, yeah,
So the one question I have is, you were not compromising on the fit out to keep the budget numbers
You
right.
only
Or getting what you
did
expected.
change one thing to lower the price. When I asked for the original quote, I asked them to just give me the basic basic car in black, not realizing that black was an upgrade. So we've gotten rid of that upgrade and went to gray, which is a no upcharge color.
Thank you. Okay, so I believe we're looking, is there any other questions or comments from the board? So looking for a motion to approve the increased cost for this capital item purchase for a police vehicle for the chief.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Robin. Robin's made that motion. Is there a second? Thank you, Ashley. Is there any public comment or questions? Debbie?
And what kind of car is it again?
Tesla, a gray Tesla.
The model is a 3, Model 3. It's not the S, which is the fancy one.
Yeah, just a quick question, is the battery hanging below the bottom of the car exposed to the ground, or is it in the trunk?
I'm not familiar with the design of the vehicle. I presume it's part of the integral part of the chassis that's on the bottom of the vehicle. It's not like it's stuck in the trunk.
Oh, okay, because those cars have problems with batteries being damaged by road debris. These batteries are like $30,000.
I mean, I'm sure there was probably 1 or 2 incidents originally with people trying to go dirt riding with them. I don't know what, but as far as I'm aware now, they're not all failing all over the place with road debris. So stay off Aram Avenue and you should be okay.
Okay.
Okay, Lynn.
This comment came up during budget discussions, but the costs or what we'll be receiving in a trade-in or selling the Ford Explorer, if we're getting $20,000 or $25,000 for that. So the net
I
cost.
think it's there'll be, we don't include in these budget numbers I just mentioned the trading value of what we'll get. I don't believe that's the case.
That's correct.
And that just does make it more palatable when it's like, okay, if we're trading in a vehicle or selling it on the market or doing
The price of those should be higher, right?
Pardon me?
The price of a used vehicle is higher now.
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of the
exactly.
biggest drivers of inflation is second-hand vehicle prices.
So where in the budget, though, does it show all these vehicles that we're selling? Because it seems like we only ever get like $6,000 a year for vehicle sales. So where's all the revenue for these Ford Explorers that are being traded in?
The board only sees the list as the township staff managers called it down, say these are the ones that are out there for public bid. So we'll see the list then of whatever it was, 4 or 5 vehicles. I mean, you see it, you bid on some of these vehicles. So I don't think we're looking in advance and say, oh, I want to make sure I know the Ford Explorer XLT is on the list this year. I presume whenever we get around to having the vehicle replaced, the other vehicles are going to replace later in the year. We do that list.
And just for the board's education, it might not be, those vehicles probably wouldn't be sold until later on in the year because we are having difficulty ordering vehicles and receiving them because of the supply chain.
Yeah, we've been told Public Works we can't get vehicles this year.
At all.
So we are currently
the items that you budget for, trucks and things.
We're looking at some options right now. We'll talk to you in the future, but Ford is telling us we cannot even order a vehicle until December.
Until December.
Yeah, at best.
And then what's the backlog after that, after ordering?
Well, we're still waiting on an international dump truck from last January to even be built.
Okay, so it's, wow.
See, another subject. I've asked this in the past. When we know these things, shouldn't we have like a budget adjustment, knowing that money isn't going to be spent this year? So that
Well, we're going to ask because of the, if they open the bids if they open the list for orders in December, we would like to be on that list because if we wait, everybody else is going to be.
Yeah, so we don't need to adjust the budget. We'll do a mid-year budget review. One of the items will be we're not where we need to be on purchasing new vehicles because of the reasons Dave's explained. We get into the budget process. We do the capital review, which we did 2 or 3 times last year as a process. We'll understand where we are. We'll see what's still being waiting to be ordered, what might need to be carried over, and we just adjust that. So it might affect the projected outcome for the year, but we don't need to make those decisions until budget season.
You're saying it would still be 2022 fiscal?
We're still working this out because it's such a strange list. We're talking with Christine, Chris, as to how we're going to. We're coming up with a plan and we'll let you know.
Okay, well hopefully we can order them So, got a motion and a second. Any other questions about the test one? Ready to take the vote? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say no. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Next on the agenda is item number 9. Discuss arranging a meeting with all EMS and fire companies serving West Goshen Township to review how to increase the efficiency of service provided. Tina, I think you wanted to introduce this subject to the board.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to kind of kick it off. I read the September 2020 reports from Chester County Fire and Emergency Medical Services Strategic Plan Study, which was about 400 pages, and their implementation, which is about another 200 pages. It was actually prepared by the Municipal Resource Inc. MRI. They were basically, just to give you a little bit of history, they were engaged by Chester County Responder Organization in cooperation with Chester County to undertake a comprehensive organizational, effective, and overall operational evaluation and deliver a report, basically, and a series of workshops addressing future countywide fire protection and EMS concerns. As a planning tool for fire chiefs, EMS chiefs, municipal managers, and elected officials. That particular report was funded through the Homeland Security Grant. Based on that report, there were about 139 recommendations. You won't solve all of them, but they looked at some of the critical ones, mainly on around cost. The report is very good, but it's for Chester County, number 1, as a whole. And number 2, it doesn't really, in my mind, look at the cost savings associated for all EMT and fire companies just in West Goshen, basically, or any cost for that matter, Chester County. It's clear in this report that Chester County is in a dire need to review our EMS and fire spending and eliminate duplication if and where we can. I don't think we know that answer yet. There was a crisis. This report indicated that it was a crisis in September of 2020 when this report was written. It has escalated since then with the pandemic, closure of 2 hospitals recently, and behavioral health issues basically escalated. I also met, along with Robin and I went, and some other people on the board, with 2 good fellowship ambulance. We basically toured their facilities and the ER and spoke to some Chester County employees. Thank you, Kim Holman and Charles Grogan, for that tour. They do a great job at what they do. It was a very eye-opening and educational opportunity, at least for me. They're like a well-oiled machine there, very efficient and dedicated, and I was impressed with the technical equipment and knowledge. Also, a great job of cutting costs where they can. But you can only squeeze a sponge so far at this point. The passion and dedication have helped keep our EMS and fire afloat, but it's not the long-term answer to some of our major issues, especially involving cost. It's clear to me that West Goshen has to look at the current financial situation and potential duplication of resources, if there's any. Like I said, we don't know that answer yet. And I think we need to do that now rather than later, because I'm concerned that the residents may have an additional emergency service tax. And we obviously definitely don't want that to happen. Because with planning properly, we should be able to avoid that. And that's mainly the goal here. And also to have better resources and efficiency, not better, because it's very good right now, but from a cost standpoint. The example they gave in this report, the tax example, was a 1 ml increase, potentially, in the event that this is not corrected or find other sources for this.
This is in the Chester County report.
This is in the Chester County report. So they said a house worth about $405,000 would probably be about around $405 per year tax increase, which in this community would be extensive. We want to avoid that. We don't want that. I think we have an obligation to the township to review this issue, avoid a crisis, and avoid a tax for all the residents. This is my recommendations to the board. Number 1, the board go ahead and meet with all the other EMT and fire companies in West Goshen, located in West Goshen. Number 2, I think in the end, we're going to need a financial study / audit to evaluate by a third party, or maybe we have our auditors do it. I don't know the answer to that yet. I need to see the big picture and a better understanding of what we need to do. And the only way to do that is to hire a third party. What I'd like them to do is basically review the overall costs of the EMT and fire in West Goshen specifically, evaluate duplication or synergies and savings. 3, cost savings to combine, eliminate, or merge services if possible and even feasible. I don't think we even know that answer as of right now. The overall recommendations, the overall summary, and then see if we can get some type of grant can be obtained to conduct this study. I think I personally need a big picture, high-level financial study, and if there's a cost savings. So basically, I think the numbers are going to speak for themselves. I don't know what they are. I don't think any of us know what they are specifically. The third party, the audit can look at the financials, summarize the financial findings, make a recommendation, evaluate, and then that will give the board a better position for options to make the right decision, whatever that decision may be. In summary, with every emergency organization, there's always going to be room for improvement. But West Goshen should be proud of the qualified and performance of our firefighters, our emergency medical technicians, paramedics, and fire police officers who provide round-the-clock protection and care. But we also need to look at the costs associated with that. So I would like to put together on the table a motion for a proposal for a third-party RFP for our internal auditors. But I think there's a need here. I think we owe it to the community, so we take a look at it and see where we stand after that. I think it was a critical thing in 2020, and I think it's worse now.
Okay, so do you mind if I say, can we hold off on making a motion yet?
Yeah, absolutely.
Discussion and hear from the public and then see what
Yeah,
what the way forward might be. So,
you're bold. I like that.
okay, so we in the beginning of January we approved the service areas for this township. We have Goshen Fire providing fire coverage. We have Good Fellowship Ambulance providing ALS for the whole of the township and BLS for some of the township. We have Goshen EMS providing BLS for some of the township, and we have the Westchester Fire Company as well. So that got the board's attention. We knew in the budget season concerns about how we get service. It didn't seem an efficient way to do it. And I think all the board members have, to some degree or other, had conversations with some of the providers, and they all, the indication certainly when we talk with GPAC the most is that there's concern about the sustainability of this, and we certainly know the county's very aware of it, the state's very aware of the whole problem with volunteerism and fire companies in particular. So I think we know there's an issue. I think, I don't know how we navigate this successfully, but I think the first step would be to have a couple of the board, so it's not a quorum, but a couple of the board volunteer to have a round-the-table discussion with all 3 of the entities that serve West Goshen Township today, and just have an open and honest discussion around the concerns that we have, the concerns that they have, and what ideas there might be to have a more simplified, cost-efficient approach. But I don't think, I personally am ready to say we need to spend money on a study. I don't think it's an audit necessarily, certainly not our municipal auditors. I'd like to kind of just start the conversation with all parties, and let's see whether people are receptive, whether the organization is receptive to the fact that change is needed, or they don't believe the board understands it and push back. I'd like to get a bit of a dialogue going before we authorize expenditure on. I'm not sure who would do a study that tells us they're all great providers. It's a big issue, and everyone knows that it's a legacy, historical issue, and it's not an efficient way to do it. So those are my thoughts. So other board members, what do you want to do?
I'm just going to rebut that to say that I agree we should sit down, and that was my number one thing. that we'd have to sit down with everybody.
Okay, but here's where I'm concerned. We've all now gone at least to one ambulance company. And we've all sort of heard their pitch for why, this would make sense. And I value hearing from those companies themselves. I'm concerned if two of us only are sitting at this round table and other board members aren't able to be present, because I think a lot of us have things that we can contribute to that conversation. And so I actually think a better approach is to invite the individual companies, and we don't need to do it all at the same time, but over the next couple of months, have them come in, show us, just hard numbers. They have the data, right? Like they have all their numbers, or they should. We're asking for them, and I agree with Sean. I don't think that we need to spend money on a third-party auditing company to come in. I feel like we have enough in-house staff that can do that, either our own auditors or whatever. Like we can look at the numbers that they provide to us to come to that decision ourselves. But I think that needs to be a public conversation, and I think, because everyone's got a stake in this, right? Even our taxpayers are going to want to hear from the fire companies, and people in the public are going to have questions and comments, and I think that would be a good approach. That's how I would like to proceed.
Okay, thanks, Ashley. Other thoughts? John, Robert?
Well, I can tell you what I want to do at this point. I want to follow up on the one suggestion Tina made, as meet with some of the other EMS and fire providers. To reach out to folks that I know in Goshen Fire and set up a tour with them. Maybe if it was somebody else, they wouldn't have a forum. If you want to do it, Tina, you and I can do that. And have a chance to sit down and have a conversation with those folks and see what their operation's all about and be able to educate ourselves. And I think it would be good for the other members of the board to, also do that as well. Have an opportunity to meet with them on their site and see what, they have to say, what they have on.
I think that's true, and I would love to go see them myself, but I also don't understand why they wouldn't just be able to come here and talk to all of us.
Doesn't necessarily one or the other. But I'm just saying, right now, at this point, that's something that I think we, as board members, can do right away.
Does the board have a vision as to what a future state would best serve the residents, or do you want to not kind of think about options until you've had this conversation with the board?
I think so, yeah. But I kind of agree with Tina that unfortunately, just understanding how things tend to be, we may end up having to go with third-party assessments just to come up with be able to have an objective perspective. But anyway, we may have to cross that bridge at some point.
I have a vision, and I'm not afraid to say it.
Well, can I just respond to John
Yeah.
there? So, my concern about us doing a West Goshen study is, these entities service other municipalities. It's hard to divorce the total picture from just studying what makes sense for us in West Goshen, given the entirety of who else they serve. And, this thing, how many pages did you wade through the county? 400?
I think 100.
It is kind of studied to death a little bit. Everybody knows there's a problem. There's always reason to do another study. So I'm not quite there. So Ashley, what are you thinking?
No, so look, we have been approached by these fire companies and EMS companies for years to have their ask for, contributions, things like that. And every year, I feel like it's our responsibility to ask them to sort of justify why they're asking for a certain amount of money, right? And that's a fair approach. They come to us, they ask, I think it's on them to explain exactly why they need the money, where else they're getting money, where the money's going. And in my experience, I've only been on the board a couple of years, in my experience, Good Fellowship Ambulance Company, they're here tonight, have been very transparent and very data oriented and organized and working with us, and I've had my questions readily answered, and to me, the fact that they'd already covered such a large portion of the township and do such a fantastic job, and you guys were there, you've all been there, and they have the advanced life support, and they have the training, and and they have this relationship with the Township County Hospital. To me, it makes a lot of sense, even monetarily, because I've looked at the numbers with Good Fellowship. It would save the township money to just have Good Fellowship service the entire township. I mean, we've looked at the numbers. Does that mean that I don't support Goshen Fire Company and EMS? Absolutely not. I absolutely support their services. This is not about like loyalty or anything like that, right? Like they're all doing the job and they're all doing a fantastic job. At the end of the day, my responsibility and what I've been elected to do is to look at our taxpayers' money and the services that they're being provided and make the best decision, especially at such a critical time like we're having now. We had a hospital come today saying we need to, after they just completed a huge renovation, we need to build more because it is out of control right now, out of control. And seeing what Good Fellowship Ambulance Company has been able to do during this pandemic and how they've responded, to me, is enough to say that I am very much in the corner of having Good Fellowship take on just that little sliver of the township that's not being covered by them already. And they already send paramedics to respond to the calls from Goshen. So when Goshen gets an ambulance call in that one tiny section of the backward sea that we are, Good Fellowship is still sending paramedics to respond to them. They've set up a satellite site out to the west. They're doing a fantastic job. They're running a great operation. They'll save us money. That's where I'm at.
Have you thought about what the implication is for fire protection? If EMS is pulled away from Goshen Fire Company for West Goshen, does it mean that now that it would struggle to be able to have a viable ability to offer fire service as they do today?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question yet.
So you have a kind of some vision in mind, so maybe that all you do is have that next step then, which is to have the conversation.
The fire to me is a whole separate issue. Fire is an entirely different animal. The way that those companies operate, they're totally different. And so, yes, that conversation needs to happen, but it's like you're talking about fire and ice. And I know that's a weird analogy. So like right now I'm talking about the ice. And in my head,
what we don't know is if you say to Goshen Fire, hey, we don't want your EMS service, they say, well, we don't have a model that can offer you the fire service that you have now. And then Westchester Fire says, well, we can't support the whole township.
I don't think that they're going to say that.
I know, but we need to have that conversation.
Absolutely have to have that conversation.
Right.
But I think that GFAC would do an excellent job covering our EMS. That's what I think.
Well, I'm going to go back and say I am comfortable with two members of the board meeting with all three organizations and having a workshop session around this. And then bringing it back to a full public discussion, like John said, it's not an either or, it's just a way to get the conversation moving in an effective way without separate public discussions. Have that initial brainstorming workshop, hear everyone's point of view, and then bring it back to the board. So I think that's the way forward.
That's what you guys want to do.
You'll be okay with that. Robin, you haven't expressed your thoughts yet.
I think some of this is GFAC and Goshen is potentially being partners.
Meeting and also report on it.
What about it? Well, we were questioning whether or not we could use our auditors. No money.
So we have money. We ended the year with a higher projected reserve for next year than we expected. So it's not a case of if this is the way to solve the problem, not study that. I'm just not supportive of the study yet. We the board to discuss with our providers and hear what you have to say. So I'll go back to say, my suggestion is that we have two volunteers from the board to set up a session with all three companies and have this conversation. And then hopefully that goes well, and we can bring it all back to a public meeting with all 5 board members.
I would like to be one of those members.
So would I.
And here's the problem.
Slip a coin.
But if that's the way the board wants to do it, then we'll have to have a full meeting with the whole board then.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
With comment first.
So I just want to, hang on a minute, is that what the board believes that is the way forward?
I'm a little bit concerned about, I want to make sure that we're going to be having each of these fire companies individually coming to those meetings. So that we're not having Westchester Fire, right? We want to separate them and have those conversations directly with each of the fire companies.
I mean, I understand, Robin, why we would do that. I don't think that's a bad idea. I'm not against doing that. Are you afraid that they're going to fight or something?
No, I just want to make sure that we have an opportunity to hear as much information from each of these organizations so that we all feel like we understand where they're coming from.
Right. And we could do that at a round table with a representative from each, or we could do it one-on-one. I mean, what do you guys think?
Whatever we do, I want to make sure it's included EMP and fire. I want the full picture.
Yeah, maybe both, yeah. But, and to Robin's point, I think actually, if we have them all in a room, I think the picture's going to get muddled. I think there's going to be so many facts and so many opinions coming from everywhere that it's not going to give us a clear picture of that company. So maybe Robin's point is good, maybe we have to do that. And that's what I was saying, maybe as a board, because all of us want to be involved in this conversation, we invite each company to come to a meeting, present to the public, we'll talk to them, ask questions, they can put up a slideshow with the, their data and all the figures and where they cover, and then the next, time we'll have something else. And yeah, maybe this takes a few months, but we're talking about it.
I'm not in a hurry to do it. I want to make sure it's done right.
I mean, the other thing is when we ask an individual organization to come, it's not just folks who operate that day to day. We need decision makers in the room too.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we have this conversation multiple times, and it'll drag the whole process out. So I think in communicating that's the intent, we should frame up what it is the board believes we want to get out of this process that we're starting. And if that is a consolidation of services, we need to be explicit, and so that those folks in that organization know what they need to come and what they need to make provide their view as to why what they provide as a service is indispensable or not. We don't want to just be meeting with folks we know and love. We should be those who also make decisions for that organization, or will need to understand the consequences if we make a decision that impacts their organization. Okay. Is there any other board thoughts? Otherwise, we'll ask public comments. Margie?
I'm with you, Sean, where you were leading. This, to me, is the classic Westchester area COG issue, because the services are beyond our boundaries, and our neighboring municipalities are having the same issues, I believe. So I think it makes sense to discuss it with the COG before you even take it to the service providers and see where, the elected officials feel, because we all share these services. So that's one point. And then the other point is, we collect a local services tax, and that, I believe, revenue source is about $1 million a year. But we don't separate it into what it was essentially first set up to be, was an emergency services tax. So I think that we should take that emergency services tax, which is what it was originally meant to be, and separate that revenue, roughly $1 million, and then look at how we distribute that, because I believe we're spending less than that $1 million between the 3 services providers, and I think we could give them more if we use that tax for what it was originally intended to be used for.
Yeah, I don't know the history there. I'm sure, you know, if there's anyone else on staff who does, I don't know how long ago it was introduced, that LSP. But,
My understanding that was a 2006 emergency road tax.
2006
Emergency road tax.
emergency road tax.
That's what I was told.
Emergency services.
But maybe,
Well, it's got absorbed into general revenue for this township. It's used to pay all kinds of bills and things.
That's
So,
right.
you know, the issue is whether the actual fact that we can institute a specific fire and EMS village is something we consider. But the board really is not at that point. We're at the point of saying, what is the best service provision model for this township? Is it the current model, or is it something that's more efficient? And then we can decide how we end up with a sustainable way of funding that over time. So I'm just trying to take the first step, which is what is the model we're looking for in terms of the service provision. Ashley gave some views to her what she's thinking. The board right now is saying we need to have a conversation with each of these three organizations, including their decision makers, because of where we think we're trying to go as a board.
But her point, to your point, Margie, it is, you're right, it's a shared sort of service, right? So we absolutely need to work with the people around us, and that's why we are on these different boards and organizations, and we're talking to municipalities next to us, because you're absolutely right.
It's a good point, Margie, and you know I'm all for trying to make sure the bigger picture is considered. Sometimes, though, you've got to take the first step, because some of these cooperative groups get paralyzed by the complexity of it. Look at how the county can't move forward, because they all know what the problem is. You've got all these recommendations, but you think they can convince all the municipalities to move forward together? Sometimes you've got to break something to fix it. And
My concern is where the difficulty is going to come into, like we go, so the two police departments were able to merge, and then we did a study a number of years ago in 2014, 15, to possibly merge our police department, where the municipalities have control over that decision because they're employees of the municipality, where the fire and EMS services, I don't think we can make them do anything. We can't make them merge like we could make
But we
our
can
police
contract with
officers
a provider for a fee in an agreement and expect a level of service. We can define a level of service and pay for that level of service. It could be a simple model that we have today.
Right.
It might not be.
Oh, I'm all for it. I think merging makes sense, but I don't know how we can make them do that.
Well, no, they're not gonna merge, we're just gonna have one, as opposed to two, or in fire cases, three.
Ashley makes a good point. Sometimes it's, maybe might be more efficient as to the company that's closest to the call location, they respond. You just base it on the number of calls, base funding on the number of calls, and have a model like that. Instead of just giving them $216,000 every year, no matter what, based on number of calls.
You pay per call if you're
maybe, because sometimes.
But if you're the provider, that's a difficult model. You've got to be there ready to respond to X calls, and you suddenly don't get X calls, you've got all the costs there.
And just to make one more thing, since we're on the topic, is that one of the things that I learned, and I'm not picking on Goshen Fire EMS by any means, I swear to you, I'm not. But one of the things is that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they train their responders in both fire and EMS, so there could be a fire call, and their trained EMS person would have to go respond to that fire call, and they're down an EMS person.
Right.
And that happens often, where Good Fellowship will, need to respond and kind of like pick up that slack, which that's just the way that that's their model. Like that's just the way that they run their company. So all I'm saying is
So
they're
it's
different.
location and who's available. So.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of issues, plenty of ways it doesn't seem to make sense from a simplicity point of view. So can the board help me decide where we've landed this? Are we going to have ask each organization to come to a public meeting and share with them a view that the board wants to look at some form of efficiency improvement, and then we expect that means they would have people who are decision makers in that organization and hear what the board has to say and realize we're trying to move on a journey. Is that where we are at the moment?
I think so, that's the way I gathered it, and then the interim will, two of us or one of us will go visit in the interim.
Well, you're free to go to visit whoever you want.
I think we need to be transparent when we contact them about what our intentions are.
Yeah, so that's right. Thank you for reminding me. So I did say I think the board should create some kind of position paper, a one-pager that says why we've had this conversation tonight, what we think we're interested in hearing about, and the kind of the direction we believe this might need to be headed, and that's why we're asking you to come to have a discussion with us. So I think we need to try and start off. So with people who were going to volunteer, I'd like to draft that up for the board to consider.
I'm happy to work on that. Tina, do you want to work on that with me? Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, so that's the action item tonight.
Sean, can I just add one thing?
Sure, Kim.
So just for history, Margie, this speaks to your point. In 2018 or 19, we actually did approach the COG because we are, like you said, the Westchester Area School District. We represent 9 municipalities. And it's really been, and Robin knows this, it's been my mission since 2016 to kind of get this collaboration, this consolidation, this merger stuff going. Because as Sean has relayed, this ain't no secret, right? This is a national problem, it's a state problem. Everybody knows what the solution is. The problem is, and this is just a cultural thing with us, there is no side by side. It's not apples to apples. If you're talking about the police department, they at least, to some extent, are apples to apples, and you're right, you can say, now you got to merge, right? You can't do that with us. We're a 501c3. They are set up a separate corporate structure. They have union entities. We do not. So there's a lot of reasons why just fiscally, responsibly, financially, it just doesn't even make sense. Even if you had the legislative power to do it, it doesn't make sense for some of these organizations to merge or consolidate. I've taken lots of courses on how to do this, a lot of ways to skin this cat. And sometimes it does come down to a township resolution of saying, look, this is what the efficiency is. We talk about the tax. The goal really should be to stave off that tax, use that money in some other way, and make sure that this is operating efficiently before you have to fund it with a tax. And yes, the answer is we could stay exactly how we are, right? You're going to have Goshen's ask, you're going to have Westchester Fire Department's asking, you're going to have ours. And based on where we are, based on that study, in 20, saying it's a mess, guess what 22 is? Now it's a hot mess, okay? So we're here, those hands, that number's going to get bigger, my number's going to get bigger, and Westchester Fire Department's number's probably going to be bigger. I'm just staving off the surprise, right? So we can fund that, we can stay in that model, but really everybody in this room and all these reports are saying that's an inefficient model, and we can do it better and probably more fiscally responsible. So that's kind of what we're asking. I'm going to, another spoiler alert, having us all in the same room, we're all going to have our different stories. We're all going to have why we should stay where we are or we should move forward. So I don't want it to be, I don't want to say a waste of your time, but I do want you to go. I want you to get the county data. I want you to get a third-party opinion. But that's what these studies are. These are third-party opinions that everybody's already paid for. The county put that money into that thing because they're looking for someone or something to tell them what they need to do to fix this. Well, the answers are in there. The problem is some of those options aren't viable. And a lot of the times it comes down to the township. It's happening around you with other townships where they're just changing the resolutions. And then you work through the ripple effect of what you do. So just to kind of give you background, we approached the COG. We've talked about consolidation, collaboration, cooperation, all of the C's for the time, my whole tenure as executive director. And I just appreciate, we're just looking for a more efficient system so those numbers don't have to keep going up and we can stave off the tax.
Yeah, well, we're already receiving the tax. We just
But
don't separate it out.
I'm with you. Yeah. But it's like he said, it kind of goes towards something else. I don't want to take money from the township that we can do a better job and be more efficient first. We're going to need municipal support, absolutely. But if it doesn't have to be this number, it can be this number, I feel responsible to say that to you. And so we could probably do this more efficient. That proportion of that tax, even if we do that, could be less.
I don't want to, I just want to make an editorial comment. I don't want to praise the LSP as an emergency tax that's been corrupted for another year. So I want to just have that out there as a comment because it's not how.
Yeah, I'm not being responsible if you didn't.
We don't have emergency tax.
I did not say that.
Okay, thank you, Kim. You know, I do feel we've all had, the board members have had individual conversations with you. I do feel we owe the other organizations a conversation here, even if getting everyone together is not going to be the solution how we move forward. Okay.
Listen, you can absolutely try it. We are willing to go. Listen, do your due diligence. I beg that of you because you need to establish the credibility of the trust. You need honorable data, okay, independent data. I wholly support that.
Okay. Well, we have a way forward, so forward unless there's any other comments we'll move on.
I was just going to suggest that the township has a valuable resource on staff who is very entrenched in these issues, and our fire marshal, Andrea Testa.
Yeah.
I would recommend speaking with Andrea and getting like a 30,000-foot view of everything, because I can tell you from past experience when I've had questions, even before I was here, she was who I contacted.
Good suggestion. So Ashley and Tina, if you could talk with Andrea when you frame up this position paper, make sure she's giving you some thoughts and it's.
Perhaps we can do that.
And then we'll engage with all three organizations and we'll have the conversation.
Actually, Chris just said, we'll set up a meeting with the four of us.
Okay. Very good, thank you. So that was agenda item number 9. So we're on to agenda item number 10, discussion and possible appointment of Mr. Keith Smith, West Goshen Township Historic Commission for a term to expire on January the 1st, 2025.
Yes, sure. Okay. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this is a little bit of a unique situation. Mr. Smith has been a participant with the Historical Commission over a period of time, with minutes indicating, listing him as a member dating back to 2019. However, I found no documentation in the township records indicating that he was formally appointed by the board. It's my understanding he's been a good participant with the historical condition, and there is an existing vacancy on his body. And I would recommend that he be appointed to fill the existing vacancy with a term that ends in January 2025. The ordinance does currently set a minimum membership, but there is no cap on the number of members.
So would this, if he was appointed, would this be give the full complement of 5, or is it higher than that?
It is higher than that. I believe this would bring it, I think there would be 9
11
members.
right now.
There's 11.
In the commission, yes, and they're going to bring on 2 other people, which I wanted to talk to you about, so that we can get those people appointed as well.
Absolutely.
So we would have that in the next 4 meetings.
You don't read some of it.
Well, the sustainability committee had one gentleman, so. And we had 2
So
others.
tonight we're just looking at Mr. Smith, and then the Historic Commission is looking at his full membership. We do have an issue about maybe looking at that ordinance and just making sure language is in there about residency requirements correctly and the maximum number of residents maybe.
Correct.
Okay. So that's for tomorrow kind of thing. Tonight we're just looking at the board looking to appoint Mr. Smith.
Correct.
But we don't have a record of being appointed.
The only record I have is him being listed. Somehow in February of 2019, he started being listed as a member, and I could find no documentation.
But Robin, you have any comment? You're all liaison to the commission.
Yeah, I think what's happened since 2013, which is when Bonnie and Nancy McCabe started becoming a member of the committee so that we could end up getting historical commission. Keith has been involved with the board, with the commission for all that time frame. But somehow, over the years, he got lost on the list. And Bonnie also told me that if people were going to be reappointed, nobody seemed to have gotten a letter. So I don't know exactly what's happening. So I wanted to work with you on that too, to kind of get to the bottom of it, so you don't have to worry about it going forward.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Very good. So is there a motion to formally appoint Mr. Smith to the Historic Commission?
Yes, I'm making that motion.
Thank you, Robin. Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Thank you, Tina. Is there any board questions or comments? Any public questions or comments? Very good. We're ready to take a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Agenda item number 11, approval of the bills to be paid for the general fund, the sewer revenue fund, the waste and recycling fund, and the capital reserve fund. Is there any questions on the bills to be paid from the board? Does someone like to make a motion to pay the bills? I'll make that motion.
So moved. The second thing.
Thank you, John. We miss you. That's a good comment. Any final thought, any issues for the board with the motion? Is there any public comment on the bills to be paid?
After you take the vote, can you just update me on something from last meeting?
Sure. All right, ready to take a vote? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Next on the agenda is...
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Before the board moves on to public comment, I would like to request that the board consider a slight amendment to the agenda for a declaration of disaster emergency related to the recent snowstorm as requested by the Public Works Director.
Okay, before, Kristen, do we need to follow the new sunshine law requirement to have a motion to amend the agenda first?
Yes.
Okay. So would a board member like to amend the agenda with a motion to include the discussion of a declaration of disaster emergency?
Motion.
Thank you, Ron. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Tina? Okay, thank you. All in favor of amending the agenda to include a discussion on the declaration of disaster emergency, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. Motion passes 5-0. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before the board this evening is consideration of a declaration of disaster emergency for Winter Storm Keenan that occurred on or about January 28th, 2022. This storm was much more significant than originally anticipated. Dave, please add anything that I might be missing. I know our crews worked extensively to address the storm.
It's just something that we would normally do in a storm that size. We didn't anticipate it being that bad at the beginning. None of the forecast could really narrow it down. So,
were there any extraordinary expenses or circumstances that you had to call in crews for anything from something?
No, we had everybody, all hands on deck, and we used quite a bit of salt. So that's why we typically would do this.
Okay.
We've been reimbursed by the state at least once.
Very good.
So we have to have this in place.
Can you just explain that more? Like what, that was a 3 or 4, 5 inches? What is the purpose of this?
To get reimbursed by the...
In the event that the state exceeds a certain threshold of damages, the township, by declaring this, would become eligible to be reimbursed for certain costs.
So does this allow like overtime pay that you get reimbursed for overtime pay?
Yeah.
Is that the main purpose?
Yeah.
Salt, right?
So, yeah, and we've had it in the past where we did get reimbursed. It's a 99% of the time you're not, but the one time that we don't do it, you could get reimbursed. So we like to have it on the books just in case.
But it's past tense, right? Because you're declaring it after the fact.
Yeah, if we would have known this was the magnitude of this storm, we would have asked the board ahead of time.
I'll try to let us know with our final declaration on the 19th.
The board was informed about the intention of approving this at the time of the storm. The declaration will be as of the 28th day of January, not tonight when we approve the sign.
All right. Yeah, I just want transparency, and I think the main issue, the reason they do this is to get reimbursement for overtime. So don't say it's because we use salt.
No, we get reimbursement.
That is not true.
Okay, all right. Well, that's...
We want to get reimbursed by the state funds if it's available. We don't want to miss out. It's what we're doing it for.
I can tell you I've gotten rain for the 30 plus inch snowstorm that happened in 2016. Mountain Borough is reimbursed for costs associated with salt overtime, bringing in a contractor to clear out our parking spaces. We documented, I think we got in the neighborhood of $30,000 from the state.
And that same story we documented, it's, you go through each truck, and I mean, and we made out, I think we were at least double that.
Yeah, and that's fine, I just don't, I mean, I know I'm losing my memory here, but this snow a couple days ago, that was like 3 or 4 inches, right?
It's just Dave's point, we don't want to be not having got a disaster emergency on the books if there is an opportunity for reimbursement.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
So, any other questions or comments?
Who made the motion?
We made a motion to
I made the
amend the
motion.
agenda. We have to make a motion to
Sean made the
approve the.
motion and John seconded it. Well, we put added to the agenda and then Sean made the motion
Yeah,
and you seconded John.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Okay, ready to take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, agenda item number 12, public comment. Any questions or comments to the board for items that were not on the agenda tonight? Margie.
Yeah, I stumbled on this a while ago and I just failed to ask about it. But this is off the Public Works portion of the website, and it talks about their brine program. It says we also have cooperative agreements with 5 local municipalities to manufacture brine and provide it in their storage tanks. The revenue helps us maintain and repair our equipment. So I'm just curious of what 5 local municipalities we manufacture the brine for and how much revenue
That's very old, it needs to be updated, but still on there. We don't do that for anybody. The only entity that will sell brine to now, but they haven't gotten it in years, is the county.
Okay, yeah, I had never heard about it.
Yeah.
So I
That's how-
read it, I'm like,
When we first got our brine system, it was more or less one of the first ones in the area. So we were making brine for East Goshen, not Willistown, up toward Phoenixville was a municipality.
Charlestown?
Yeah, Charlestown. And a couple others along with the county.
So that stopped several years ago.
Yeah, they've all since seen the need for it, and they make it themselves. We actually, when we started, the borough had the first brine system. They would actually make brine for us. We would haul it in a tanker truck, and just so we could try it to see if it was effective and whatnot. But it wasn't enough to do the entire town.
Any other questions?
you would be able to follow up on my treasurer's report question from us.
Yes, I was correct. It will be movement out of restricted parks. Is that what it was? I forget.
Yeah.
Will be shown in the next month. It's just the way the county ledgers are updated, the journal entries are made.
Yeah, but that's understandable, but what happens is that was the end of the year, that was December 2021 treasurer's report and budget, so that changes the whole balance for 2021 by transferring the funds now.
We'll have Christine send you notice whether that's true or not.
Okay, and then what did the board decide on the union dues, the FLP dues?
No board member suggested taking any action on that. You raised that last meeting.
So that's coming out of taxpayer money?
That is true, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I just have one comment. I'm Steve Krim, I live in Owen Road. As you approach your analysis of fire and EMS, just be very cautious because systems depend on each other. You're dealing with a lot of volunteers, you're dealing with career people, and there's a balance. And one thing that you really don't want to do is upset the balance, okay? You want to do what's best for the township, but it's broader than the township sometimes. And so I just going to give you a word of caution of how you get into this and the decisions you make.
That sounds like sage advice. We appreciate it.
I've been a volunteer for a long time, and so I've seen it a lot, what happens, and we depend on each other. Our lives depend on each other. Your lives depend on us. And until you have a bad day, you don't need us. When you need us, you need us.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Have a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ashley. A second. I'll second. All in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. We're adjourned.
Yes.